Can we turn that up?
This is an example of some of the messages posted on the internet. Headline: Anti-capitalist, anti-authoritarian gathering in Sacramento, June 23rd. Posted on June 18th. Sacramento, California, and anyone wondering where the next large anarchist protest is going to be, take note that scores of people are mobilizing to be there for this conference. I am in Eugene, Oregon, and the anarchist community is migrating here in scores. Many more from other points north and south of you are doing the same. I would imagine many anarchist actions are intended to make the news and to disrupt local day-to-day routines in California's capital. Spread the word. Don't be caught by surprise. A community watch note: the Eugene anarchists cut through Seattle's police lines like hot knives through butter, according to Seattle police reports.
In their own words, June 9th, 2003, posted by Droog on Portland's Indie Media. SAC is happening because I know that at least my crew of 150 plus will be there. Also, we need to separate groups, black blocs from direct actioners. Have it happen all over the city and the police will be spread too thin. After all, we must think, what is our approach, our intention? I, for one, am working for global justice and ecological and human sustainability, but we must fight anthropocentrism with planned, coordinated action. Ignorance in the form of emotions and traditions cannot be fought with our logic or reason. The powerful and the masses have proven time and again to have little or no reason, instead falling back on old cliches and catchisms. Have fun, be safe, don't hurt anyone, and don't get caught.
Red 20 directed at 15th and J to respond to a 15th and Q. Look for a girl with a slingshot. Just had a subject, male, white on a bicycle, white t-shirt, riding westbound on P-Falls. He's got a Motorola radio. He's directing these guys in. JOC from Red 20.
Red 20 go.
16th and Q. We have about 100 people, mostly in violation of the city code, many wearing masks. They're busting down the fence at Community Gardens. Jock from Union 20, we're moving to the IMAX.
Check.
I want to contain that area. We're not going to give it up. 20, they had stopped at 13th. They're not moving any farther. They're taking their barricades and they're putting them back in the street, the metal barricades. I'm solo up here. It's about 300. I'm backing off.
Move north to the alley. You got enough people there to back you up.
I'm going south. You got about 50 guys behind me. Okay. Jack 30, Mark 1 at custody, 53K, possession of a switchblade knife.
We could make multi-arrests here if we so choose, for dispersal orders.
Okay, they're all traveling on H. Henry against traffic from 15th.
South H, westbound H.
We've made 5 or 6 traffic admonishments plus the unlawful assembly. If they get in a position, everyone in that group is arrestable. Tom, we have nobody here. We've been following these guys by ourselves.
That's fine, thank you. 940, be advised, the forces that I have here, we're not going to be able to hold these guys if we can get another team of horses here.
Do we have an ETA for a squad to arrest these guys? They're analyzing vehicles as they go. We're the only 2 officers here. 14th and H. Henry.
I'll get some platoons here and wagons. We'll start heading your way.
Okay, we're going to kind of keep them moving.
Forward command, the radio traffic indicates they still want to go to the IMAX. Mike 30, you copy? We have the female in custody with the slingshot. We're at 15th and J. Need a booking team. The radio traffic indicates they're heading back to the IMAX again. On the crossing J, continue southbound 12. They're going to meet up with about 40 or 50 or so at K King and 12. Force y'all, I'll send you the red platoon to make some arrests when you go over there.
4CO from someone, they're throwing some type of rocks at some buildings here, and they're making a mad dash southbound 12 now.
out here at 12th and K just doubled. Looks like more of the radical element.
Air 1, I'm guessing about 200 at this time. 200, 12th and K King.
If the goal is to make arrests, we can take 12th Street and basically we'll have an arrestable area. But I have absolutely no personnel with me besides Sergeant Valdez and myself to contain this area.
Further on the east side, light standard, climb on the standard, 12th and K. We need a team at J and 11 to move down to K and eastbound.
Tom 4, clear the air. We're coming in from the south. We're marching in right now. Give me 2 minutes for the dispersal order again.
Just got fresh information. 16 and P. Paul report that they're heading to Starbucks. There's a trash at Starbucks.
Mayor, I'm finding it distracting.
Me too.
Audience reaction. If they could be
We have a request for
some
if the audience
courtesy
could
here.
be a little bit quieter, that would help us be able to hear what's going on, and everyone will have a chance to speak.
Good evening, Sacramento City Council members. My name is Jonathan Mraz. As a member of the Sacramento community, let me extend my gratitude for a job well done by our local and state law enforcement officials during the USDA Ag Conference. Although there were many, the large number of uniforms were needed to prevent total anarchy or chaos from reigning supreme in Sacramento. All during the demonstration, I had been taking photographs and walking alongside the protesters. Most of the people I was capturing with my lens were engaged in peaceful, lawful activity. There were, however, reports of illegal acts taking place away from the parade route. Nearly 60 protesters caused over $3,000 worth of damage. That's much less than 1% of the property damage caused by protesters in Seattle a few years ago. The proactive response of our law enforcement agencies is to be commended for their outstanding service to this community and for acting as a role model for other police agencies to follow should the need arise. Thank you.
In their own words. In the afternoon, over 1,000 people descended on downtown and executed roving, decentralized actions converging on the convention center where the WTO trade show was happening. The building was briefly surrounded and all traffic in and out halted. Fences were pulled down, dumpsters pushed into the street, and political messages tagged on walls and windows. In other words, you broke the law, vandalized private property, disregarded other people's rights, and all this the day before your permitted protest. And now you question why the police presence.
I'm Mike Sarkissian, a 50-year resident of Sacramento. I believe in free speech, but the dumping of grain onto 16th Street in mid-commute traffic doesn't constitute speech. Its only purpose is to harass the citizenry. This is just one of the things that our police department prevented during the demonstrations a few months back. Listening to police radio and the demonstrators' own radio broadcast as a part of the Community Watch effort, I had the opportunity to hear firsthand what was happening. Dumpsters turned over in the streets, barriers moved to disrupt traffic. Demonstrators jumping on the hoods of vehicles do not constitute free speech. In one case, a demonstrator assaulted a television cameraman and jammed the camera into his face. Later, that same demonstrator claimed falsely that the cameraman had assaulted her. While there can be no doubt that many of the protesters were peaceful, among them were many who were not, in particular those who dressed in black and covered their faces. The organizers did nothing to prevent these folks from spray painting vehicles or trying to crash the site of the conference. In fact, all they did was protect them. I sympathize with many of the concerns demonstrators had about genetically engineered foods, but their stated methods as well as their actions were not based on free speech, but designed to shut down the conference and tie up the city.
Madam Mayor, ladies and gentlemen of the Council, Chief Nahara, and those who may be viewing this presentation on another occasion. My name is Dave Janae. I'm a Midtown resident and a proud member of Sacramento Community Watch. The images that you've just viewed and the police audio you heard may refute many of the claims that you'll hear from others. Those allegations are critical of our police department, our officers, and the city's handling of the United States Department of Agricultural Conference hosted in Sacramento. Let's face it, they come from protesters, some of whom's only purpose is to disrupt each of these events in cities around the globe. Now you'll hear from people, many who are dedicated to their cause and passionate in their beliefs. What we don't hear from them is condemnation for and renunciation of Eugene anarchists or black bloc domestic terrorists who swarm host cities, leaving destruction, injured police and civilians in their wake. The evidence is in the sound and images that opened this presentation. You heard for yourself what it took for overwhelmed police to regain control of our city. What if they didn't have those resources? Well, they did. And they used them with far greater restraint than that of the protesters.
Thank you, Mr. Janae.
Point 1, it's the parade and park use regulations.
Good evening, Mayor, Council members.
Good evening.
My name is Gary Little. I'm your Area 4 Director. Tonight we have a short 3-part presentation on the item before you, which is an item to repeal and reenact the city code provisions that regulate and at times restrict various items that can be carried or possessed during parades and similar events and activities. My job will be to provide an overview of how the presentation is going to occur. And that presentation is going to start with your Police Chief, Al Nahara, providing an overview of the item that's before you tonight. As part of his discussion, he will include information on the need for the ordinance that restricts various items during parades, as well as addresses the timing of the process, the process for permits. The Chief will also include information about why actions have been taken to bring this item forward to you. You may recall that on June 29th, there was an item that you heard that was passed for publication item on this, on previously proposed amendments. And as part of the discussion, you've requested that staff go back and provide some additional outreach to the community. And we have done that, and Max Fernandez will do the second part of tonight's presentation by providing some information on what we heard during those community discussions. After Max Fernandez provides information on the community outreach, then Chief Nahara will conclude the presentation. wrapping up any additional information that he has to help you understand the reason for moving forward on the ordinance. We will be available for answering and responding to any questions or concerns or issues that arise. And at this point, if I may call upon Chief Nahara to come forward and start with the presentation.
Thank you, Gary. Hello, Chief.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the Council, Mr. Thomas. I think to start off with here tonight, I'm going to give a real brief summary of kind of how we got here regarding this ordinance. Our original ordinance was in place since about 1983. And sometime late, or I should say early in 2003, we formed an interdepartmental task force to look at this ordinance. We were trying to put some sort of a reasonable procedure in place for handling parades and applications and park permits. Additionally, we had some evidence to suggest that there was the possibility of some violent actions coming during the upcoming USDA conference that we're preparing for in June of 2003. On June 17th, City Council passed ordinance number 2003-026 and 2003-028. Both those ordinances were adopted. The key elements to the ordinance at that time and the ordinance that we have in place today were the time frames that were outlined and required for the processing of permits, an enhanced ability to protect property and public safety by providing prohibition of carrying of various items, various weapons during parades and permits. Subsequently, staff has further evaluated this ordinance. We've had the chance now to debrief the USDA event in quite some detail. This council has had public hearings on the USDA event in quite some detail. Quite a bit of public comment was had from all of those events. And the staff went back and put together a new ordinance with the goal of developing a reasonable administration, again, of parades, as well as trying to safeguard public safety and balance those First Amendment rights that are so important to everyone. On June 29th in 2004, the new draft parade ordinance was PFP'd, and the council asked staff for additional public comment from focus groups, various community groups, as well as a web posting of the particular documents that we had of the proposed ordinance and of the staff report. At this point, staff has completed all of those requirements that council wanted us to do. We've gotten a lot of public input. We've made some fairly significant modifications to the ordinance, and I believe that we're ready this evening to present this very important document to you. It's clearly very important to me as your police chief to have the ability to protect the city, to protect property, to protect our citizens from violence, but I've also sworn a duty to protect the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of California. And that's equally important to me. And I'm hoping that tonight we can hit that balance on that ordinance that we need to have. With that, I'm not going to take too much more time. What I'd like is to ask Max Fernandez to come and to summarize and give you some of the input that we received from the community groups and the focus groups that we did in the last few weeks. Max, if you would, please.
Thank you, Chief. Hi, Max.
Thank you. Hi. Mayor Fargo, members of the council, Max Fernandez, Neighborhood Services. And I'll try to be brief because I'm sure you'll hear a lot of detail on the kind of input that we received at the various meetings that were had regarding this issue. And what I want to do is just give you some general themes that came out of those meetings. The first meeting, the first theme, I should say, is to repeal the ordinance that was adopted on June 17th, 2003. I think that was probably the strongest and the most consistent theme throughout. Second, the language regarding the restriction of types of objects that can be carried in these parades, the size of the sticks or the handles for protest signs and restrictive language like that was very much at issue. And there's a whole lot of examples from golf balls to batteries, etc. Those were also brought up. And the fact is that that theme was just reoccurring. And last, or another one of the themes was, how do we somehow permit spontaneous type events? And it was felt that the language regarding that permitting was too restrictive, and it would be next to impossible to have spontaneous type events if something happened and they needed to get a group together in a short time. There's a lot of detail that's going to come out, I'm sure, with the speakers regarding those issues. Another issue that came up in the final meeting that we had was that there should be an appellate process for a permit if a permit is denied, that there should be some kind of an appeal that the permit applicant can go through if, in fact, that a permit is denied by the city staff. And those are pretty much the general themes. Again, like I said, I'm sure there are a lot of people here that will give you a lot of detail regarding specifics on those themes, but that's generally what we heard. Repeal the ordinance, take out some of the language, do something about the spontaneous events, and put together an appellate process. And that's the end of mine, and I guess Albert's going to come back and finish you up.
Please give me the hard part. I'm going to go over the ordinance very briefly and hit the high notes in terms of the changes that we're proposing. I'm sure all of you have already had a chance to look at this in detail, but I'm going to go over it very quickly. First of all, we have on the prohibition against carrying of weapons, that is firearms, we are proposing an exception for law enforcement officers, soldiers of the armed forces and the National Guard, the California National Guard. Regarding the signs and the sign material, we have added foam board or other similar low-density type material. Going on to item 7, there's a little bit of a confusion on this particular issue in that we are proposing that it shall be unlawful for any person to carry or possess bricks of any size or stones or rocks or pieces of asphalt or concrete or other pieces of similar hard material. What the intent is there is for that to be aggregate type material. We're not talking about anything else, because we have, in fact, eliminated all of the delineation of items in the current ordinance that prohibits golf balls, ball bearings, marbles, paint balls, solid balls, all of those things. It became kind of pointless to try to enumerate everything that could be used as a projectile. So rather than that, we eliminated all of that language and just included rocks, bricks, and aggregate type of material. The other high point that I want to hit is item number 10 on the proposed ordinance. It was a great confusion to a lot of people in terms of bandanas and gas masks and similar face coverings. What we are proposing in this ordinance is that it shall be unlawful for any person to carry, possess, or wear any operational gas mask. And the key word there obviously is operational, because if a person wants to wear a gas mask to make a point, a parody, a satire, if you will, of something, as long as that gas mask is not in fact operational, in other words, the filters don't operate and will not filter tear gas or similar gas that I hope we never ever have to see in the city of Sacramento, the gas mask wouldn't function for that purpose. But it can function for hiding a person's identity if that's what they want, or making some other political or other point that they're trying to make wearing a gas mask, as long as it's not functional. This section does not prohibit wearing bandanas, masks, facial coverings, costumes, or anything that will hide a person's identity. I don't know what's happening to my voice tonight. Usually I can talk a lot. No, I'm fine, thank you. The last point that I want to make in the summary of this ordinance, the final high point, is on page 4, in that nothing in subsection A or in this ordinance shall be construed to restrict or interfere with the right to use cameras, tape recorders, or other audio video devices to document or record events occurring at a parade or demonstration by any party. And that, in a quick summary, is the proposed ordinance that staff has put together. Again, what we're proposing is an ordinance that provides for the ability to protect public safety for your police department, your fire departments, and to properly have the ability to reasonably administer some sort of a process for permits, for parades, and for parks. Staff has really benefited from the often disastrous experiences from other cities. And we're very aware of the need for a carefully and thoughtfully developed ordinance. All the while, we're very mindful of the need to protect every citizen's right to free speech and the exercise of a person's rights under the U.S. Constitution, the California Constitution. If you have any questions for staff at this point, we can take questions.
Thank you, Chief. I know that the focus of tonight, and I want to clarify this for the audience, is on the parade ordinance itself and not on the USDA conference, but clearly that's the backdrop for the initial drafting of the revised ordinance and for a lot of the concerns that are going to be raised here tonight, and I understand that. Given that, prior to the USDA conference and since the USDA conference, we haven't ever had the kind of concerns that we had during that event. Has there been an effort, and maybe this is a question more for the city manager, has there been a change in how conferences and conventions are approved in the city of Sacramento? I mean, because day to day, we are the state capital of California, and people on a regular basis, whether they're doing it as part of an AIDS walk on last Sunday morning, or whether they're doing it as a part of just talking to people in the legislature and the governor's office, or to us, and people protest and demonstrate peacefully on a regular basis. That is part of what we do in Sacramento. Have we changed and made some modifications so that we can avoid USDA conference type events in the future?
We pay a lot. We learned a lot from that USDA experience, and we pay a lot more attention to the nuances of the conferences and events that are held here in Sacramento, so that we can be more aware of any liability that we are incurring by signing up, if you will, conferences here, especially if they're at our facilities. We have been following this ordinance very carefully since those days. And you're right, we have a lot of events in Sacramento. Weekly, we have demonstrations or of one form or another.
Some weeks it's daily.
And equally important, we've been working with the California Highway Patrol and the officials at the state capitol to govern their events.
Well, that's their events, and we can't.
Well,
I mean, what they do and their schedule at the capitol is theirs.
But to answer the question specifically, the Convention Bureau does have a consultation requirement with the city staff on events. We have perspectives coming up, and as the chief alluded to, every year perspectives draws attention. Every year, sometimes a little more than other years. But in trying to anticipate what will be a flashpoint is difficult when you're looking at potentially 5 or as much as 10 years out on some of these conventions. There is a required consultation, and that is being undertaken since the USDA.
Okay, so we have made a change. I just think that's an important point we need to make, because that's part of what's driving this entire conversation, and that is something I think we need to pay attention to. There are things we can't avoid. We are the state capital of California, and we're going to be next week and next year as well, so we anticipate a fair amount of controversy being the state capital of California. But sometimes we borrow trouble that maybe we don't need to.
You're absolutely correct, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Trethwaite?
Actually, it's a follow-up question to the mayors. And since the USDA conference that required people came in and asked for a permit, if I understand that correctly, have we issued permits in the last since that time?
You're talking parade permits?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
we have. Yeah. Approximately one a month, or
actually,
a dozen?
I don't know.
Okay.
I do need help soon. The police department doesn't issue them.
Yeah, as the council will recall, the Parks and Recreation Department is actually the point for special events. We run, I want to think total, I mean, it's hundreds of special events. We've had it since the USDA. We've probably had 20 parades that I can think of off the top of my head. One of the things that is outlined in your staff report that we've briefed council on is that the whole issue of spontaneous permits and parades, and we're ready to discuss that. We have that going all the time. We're not recommending at this time that be modified, but of course that's entirely up to the council. But other than that, yes, we have issued a number of permits in the last 12 months.
Right.
Does that answer? Do you have other questions?
Yeah, I did have a follow-up question, but I lost my speaker. He couldn't wait to sit down.
Mr. Ramirez, we weren't apparently raised, not quite done, so please don't.
Mayor and members of council, I just remembered our specialist in this area of permitting is in the audience, Alan Tomiyama. So, Alan, if I'm speaking out of school, please kick me.
No, I appreciate the answers you've given. But on the spontaneous, I can understand permits for many of the marches we have and such. But spontaneous, do we have a working definition of that?
Under the current ordinance, we have a definition that ties to a event that triggers an activity and a process by which, if an event requires a spontaneous response by the public, we're supposed to be issuing a permit. We will candidly indicate that that is somewhat problematic, and Alan Tomiyama probably can walk you through if you want to know the actual mechanics of an issuance of a permit in that committee. But there is a definition in the existing ordinance to the extent that it's tied to the time and the event.
Right. And at this time, you're recommending just to leave that existing wording in, but you're willing to look at it later? Is that
this came up, as I believe, and I apologize, I was out of the room when your area director, Max Fernandez, indicated that was one of the themes that came up, but we chose not to deal with it at this time. That, of course, is entirely up to the council.
Which means we do require?
It stands, correct. And maybe the city attorney would like to speak to that.
Yeah, let me jump in briefly. The ordinance before the amendments of June of last year included a spontaneous parade exception, and it required notice, application, and a permit a great deal more time in advance. What was added last year was to reduce it to 24 hours. The definition is taken from a number of other jurisdictions who are trying to deal with the very issue of spontaneous parade. There is a definition. It is similar to what you'll find in San Luis Obispo, Beverly Hills, and a couple of other jurisdictions. It is problematic. It always will be. An alternative approach that you may wish to think about, and is found in other jurisdictions, is to establish a limit, a minimum limit, if you will, on the number of persons that may gather before there's any permit requirement. For example, it may say, some do it with spontaneous events, some do it just as a matter of course, that unless there's going to be 75 or more, 50 or more, 100 or more, no permit is required. You'll see that in larger jurisdictions. San Diego has one, Washington, D.C., and a few other cities. So by virtue of only requiring a permit for a larger event, which presents the opportunity for problems with traffic or whatever, it allows for spontaneous events of a reasonable number of people without having to go through a permitting process of any kind, and without having to figure out what is a spontaneous event, because that's a difficult issue. The city's definition is much more liberal than you find in other jurisdictions in terms of defining what is a spontaneous event, but nevertheless, it's difficult. It's something within the past 10 days that has come to the public's attention. Other cities have used 24 or 72 hours, but it is a difficult issue to address.
Yeah, it appears to me it's very difficult, especially, as I think the chief said, we want to weigh both the right to assemble and free speech, as well as protecting the city and private property and people. So I'm still unclear. So we have a fairly liberal written policy today that, Rich, was events that are 10 are current. I mean, it doesn't sound very spontaneous, 10 days.
Well, that's correct. But part of the concern is what's spontaneous. Is it 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours, or is it a speech you see on television that drives you nuts? It's application for spontaneous parade involving free speech rights, in which are occasioned by news or affairs coming into public knowledge within 10 days of the date of the proposed parade. Most cities have 48 hours or 72 hours. You could pick a longer time. This is similar to what we had in the past, but we required a much longer period of time in which you filed for a permit. And that presents a problem. As time has gone on, the time period for seeking a permit under the court cases has been reduced. This is, frankly, I suppose, a little more liberal than what you see in the other cities. Long Beach was taken to task for its ordinance. It responded with a spontaneous parade exception, which has a shorter duration. They choose not to require a permit, but they choose to require that you give notice, and they confer upon the city manager the right to deny this spontaneous parade, even though they don't have a permitting process. So we chose instead to include a permitting process with a longer period of time for spontaneity.
Quote unquote spontaneity.
Yes.
Right. Thank you. I think I've learned quite a bit.
Thank you, Ray. Are there other comments or questions from council members before we start the public testimony? We do have at this point, as of last count, if I counted correctly, 37 speakers. And we have a new, make that 38, and would someone please pick up the speaker slips, because if you haven't turned it in yet, get it in the next minute or we're out of time. So, in fact, we need to have the council consider whether or not we want to use the West Sacramento rule, which is once the hearing starts, you can't sign up anymore, so we don't have debates going on amongst speakers. But normally we give people 3 minutes. If we do that, we will have approximately 2 hours of testimony. If we give people 2 minutes, we'll have a little more than an hour and 15 minutes worth of testimony. And our new rule at the council here is that at 10 o'clock, which is in about an hour and a half, we will stop the meeting, and I will ask the council members if they would like to continue to go forward. So obviously we're going to be going past 10 unless people on the council decide they don't want to. I guess my recommendation would be, given the number of speakers, that we go ahead and go to a 2-minute time frame instead of 3 minutes, unless someone tells me that they need more than that and are representing an organization. I think most of us can get our thoughts out in 2 minutes. I have granted one organization's request for a 10-minute presentation, which we will hear in a little bit, in an effort to be fair in terms of free speech. So with that, without any other public or council members who want to speak, and what I'm going to do, because despite the staff's meetings which they held, it's very clear that we are nowhere near consensus on this issue. The speakers are pretty much divided in half, in favor and opposed. So it will be up to the council to hear it all and make a decision, or not tonight. Hopefully we'll be able to get to a decision tonight. But we obviously did not get very close to working things out through whatever effort and whatever meetings our staff held. So with that, and there are some people that have marked in favor, some that have marked opposed, and some that didn't mark. And so those that didn't mark we'll have later. I'm going to do half and half because I don't want people to fade too much. We'll do half in favor, some in favor, some opposed, and go back and forth that way, just in trying to be fair here. So with that, we will first hear from Mark Marin, and then Heidi McLean, Ellen Schwartz, Dan, I think it's Bacher, and Rita Gonzalez. We will then hear from Dave Janae and then we will go back to, because I'm giving Dave 10 minutes on behalf of Community Watch, we will then go back to those opposed and then start hearing those in favor. So with that, Mark Maron.
Thank you,
2 minutes.
Fargo and members of the City Council. I didn't sign up first, so I'm kind of surprised that I was taken first. But I'm pleased to try to do a little overview of the objections that I'm sure you're going to hear until the close of the meeting from various members of the community. I am very concerned that we have embarked down a road where we're increasing regulation that's restrictive on people's exercise of their constitutional and civil rights. Until recently, we didn't have this ordinance, and as far as I'm aware, we had no problems that this ordinance would have prevented. We have criminal laws, codes, which can be enforced against illegal conduct. And in fact, if someone throws something that is in his pocket that even isn't excluded or precluded from being carried, that person could be arrested. What we do with this ordinance is criminalize conduct of which people are generally unaware, and we make criminals of passersby who might otherwise want to join a parade. It's ridiculous to think that we can take a flagpole which has a flag on it and call it a weapon, and yet that's what this ordinance does. No one would stop somebody in an honor guard marching down a city street as part of a parade, and yet put a banner that didn't have the stars and stripes on it, and it becomes something which the police could use as a basis for arresting that person. This will require constant judgment, exercise of discretion, and in my opinion, violation of rights as the discretion is exercised to infringe on what is otherwise peaceful, ordinary, common conduct. Essentially, we are into a prior restraint against conduct which is perfectly legal because we think that a possession of a certain object or a carrying of something that does not conform precisely to the ordinance's measurements demonstrate a propensity to inflict some kind of violence or property damage.
Mr. Maron, your 2 minutes is up.
See the red sign.
I'm sorry, it's going to go very quickly for everyone.
Thank you.
But thank you.
Repeal the ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Maron. Heidi McLean.
My name's Heidi McLean. I'm speaking on behalf of the Sacramento Coalition for Sustainable Agriculture, which only still exists because of your ordinance. Because since it was a coalition just created for the ministerial, but here we are still. Spontaneous, arising from impulse, not suggested by another, and not premeditated. That's the definition in the dictionary. Why don't you think about that before you try to regulate spontaneous activity, because spontaneity means no one is responsible. They're doing it at the moment, not 72 hours in advance, not 24 hours in advance. Like right now, I'm being spontaneous. I don't understand what you mean when you say it shall be unlawful for any person to carry or possess bricks, stones, rocks, pieces of asphalt or concrete, or pieces of other similar hard materials, or substances that are capable of being thrown or projected, or are more than blah, blah, blah. I don't see that this only refers to rocks. If you're going to pass this tonight, you better have a better definition of what you're talking about. This whole thing is overly broad. I personally felt extremely intimidated by the police actions during the ministerial, to the point where, whereas in Seattle I had no problem marching against the World Trade Organization, in Sacramento, because I had promised my children I would not be arrested, I did not march because I felt there was no knowing why anyone would be arrested. And I'm an experienced activist. There's supposed to be a subsection A in this, and I can't find it. You have references to subsection A. This is very sloppily done. I would like to see you bring it back in a better form so that it's more understandable when you read it. And above all, please stop trying to make this a police state. When you say you outlaw gas masks, then I have to be fearful that you're going to be using chemical agents against me and my children if we exercise our right to free speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. Okay, we have to do something that I do sometimes. We're going to go ahead and have everybody applaud and for everyone right now and get it out of your system, because otherwise we're going to be here a lot longer. So let's everybody applaud for everybody. It's even for everyone. I really appreciate your doing that. Thank you very much. And the other thing which I should probably do is I'm assuming that people with the red signs say are those that are in opposition of the parade ordinance. Would you please stand? And then so we see who here is in opposition of the ordinance as it's currently drafted. Okay. If you would please sit down. Thank you. After he gets your picture. And those people who are in favor of the revised ordinance, please stand. Well, we know. Okay. Thank you very much. So now we know who's here, and we're going to try to work through this together. And I hope that the staff is going to be taking notes of the questions so that things like the subsection A, we're assuming, since this was not drafted by the council, that the staff will be responding to the questions at the end. And I don't think we need to do it as we go through it. It'll take too long. But if you could be keeping track of the questions so that we could have those answered, that would be helpful. Okay. With that, Ellen Schwartz will be our next speaker, followed by Dan Bacher.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Thank you for letting me speak. I'm Ellen Schwartz. I am the co-facilitator of the Sacramento Coalition to Stop the Patriot Act. And maybe some of you remember last fall you passed, by a vote of 8-1, a resolution proclaiming your commitment to civil liberties and deploring the threat to those liberties that are represented by the USA Patriot Act. And so we're profoundly disappointed with your determination, or perhaps you're not determined and maybe you'll do the right thing. But we would be profoundly disappointed if you continue to keep in place this parade ordinance, which is just as much a threat to our civil liberties. It's already illegal for me to throw a rock through a window. Why is it illegal for me to carry my cell phone, which could be used as a projectile, and if I took my bra off during a parade, and I could just... So, you know, you gotta arrest me for wearing a bra or repeal this parade ordinance.
Okay, thank you, Ellen.
I'm Dan Bacher. I'm with the Organic Sacramento and also the Sacramento Coalition to Stop the Patriot Act. And I disagree profoundly with the staff recommendations on item 12.1. And I simply say that we need to totally rescind the ordinance. It completely conflicts with the City Council's resolution last fall to support civil liberties and to oppose the Patriot Act. Now, San Francisco and a lot of other big cities, as far as I know, don't have repressive ordinances similar to this. They have huge demonstrations all the time, and I don't see any reason why Sacramento has any need to have this type of repressive ordinance. Since it's unconstitutional, there's no need for it. Get rid of it, rescind it. I think we're missing the whole point by going over, you know, whether we allow marbles or whether we allow aggregate bricks or whether we allow some type of object or whatever. I mean, there's already existing criminal codes that take care of those problems, and people can be arrested if the police need to do so. So, in summary, I'd like to say we got to rescind this ordinance and throw it down into the dustbin of history. It's a mistake. I think the City Council has to admit it was a big mistake and to rescind it once and for all and get back to business.
Thank you, Dan. Rita Gonzalez will be our next speaker.
Hello.
My name is Rita Gonzalez. I just wanted to express a few things I'm concerned about. Number one is the selective enforcement of this ordinance, where one group is not even questioned or looked at or followed or what have you, and another one is, which is what I witnessed the very next day following this, the final day of the event that this ordinance was enacted for. The following day at the state capitol and blocks away from the state capitol, nothing was done to this certain group that was protesting for their rights. I find it odd that we have to protect citizens from citizens who are enacting their rights and coming out in peaceful protests. I find it very vague with words such as similar. I mean, where do we draw the line on what's similar? Where words like other material, I mean, that could be a shoe, that could be a bracelet, it could be anything. And personally, I feel that I know for a fact that files are being compiled on activists, especially activists that are frequent activists. They turn out, they show up, they go to committees, they're involved. And I feel that this is used to arrest people so they can get information on them, compile files, find out how many times they go to certain activities and how involved they are in those activities. I personally feel that our history has shown this to be the case, especially during the civil rights movement. Spontaneous gatherings, as far as I know, that's a positive in the community. When groups of people in your community gather, whether it be to rejoice, to support issues, or to socialize, that to me seems like it's a positive that we should be trying to support and not trying to arrest people for. As far as the charges get dropped, you know, if they find out that this person really wasn't so criminal, yes, they do, but no one gets repaid for the time they lose going to court, for the time they lose being arrested, for the ache and anguish they feel going to jail over something that is ridiculously selective. I would like to end, since my time is up, with a quote from JFK speaking on behalf of Martin Luther King and his movement. "Those who make peaceful revolution impossible only make violent revolution inevitable."
Thank you, Rita. Dave, Janae, are you ready to do your...
With one clarification, Your Honor. Very briefly, as explained to city staff over the last 2 days, we have no control over the length of our presentation. It runs about 12 and a half minutes. We forfeited 6 speakers for 2 minutes each. If you'd like us to forfeit the 7th speaker, we'd be happy to do that in deference to our time and fairness.
Okay, but it's a set program for 12 minutes?
Yes, it
okay.
runs automatically. It's not narrated. It runs automatically. Is that acceptable to the mayor?
Yes.
At that point, then,
yeah.
Chris, you'll forfeit your?
Yes, I will.
Very good.
Okay.
And you have a list of the speakers, starting with Mr. Hastings. We'll open it after the presentation when you're ready to call on us back. Thank you.
Okay, will do. Thank you, Dave. Can we turn that?
This is an example of some of the messages posted on the internet. Headline: Anti-capitalist, anti-authoritarian gathering in Sacramento, June 23rd. Posted on June 18th. Sacramento, California, and anyone wondering where the next large anarchist protest is going to be, take note that scores of people are mobilizing to be there for this conference. I am in Eugene, Oregon, and the anarchist community is migrating here in scores. Many more from other points north and south of you are doing the same. I would imagine many anarchist actions are intended to make the news and to disrupt local day-to-day routines in California's capital. Spread the word. Don't be caught by surprise. A Community Watch note: the Eugene anarchists cut through Seattle's police lines like hot knives through butter, according to Seattle police reports.
In their own words, June 9th, 2003, posted by Droog on Portland's Indie Media. SAC is happening because I know that at least my crew of 150 plus will be there. Also, we need to separate groups, black blocs from direct actioners. Have it happen all over the city, and the police will be spread too thin. After all, we must think, what is our approach, our intention? I, for one, am working for global justice and ecological and human sustainability, but we must fight anthropocentrism with planned, coordinated action. Ignorance in the form of emotions and traditions cannot be fought with our logic or reason. The powerful and the masses have proven time and again to have little or no reason, instead falling back on old cliches and catchisms. Have fun, be safe, don't hurt anyone, and don't get caught.
Red 20, directed at 15th and J to respond to a 15th and Q, looking for a girl with a slingshot. Just had a subject, male, white on a bicycle, white t-shirt, riding westbound on P-Paul. He's got a Motorola radio. He's directing these guys in. JOC from Red 20. Red 20, go. 16th and Q, we have about 100 people, mostly in violation of the city code, many wearing masks. They're busting down the fence at Community Gardens. Jock from Union 20, we're moving to the IMAX. Check. I want to contain that area. We're not going to give it up. 20, they have stopped at 13th. They're not moving any farther. They're taking their barricades and they're putting them back in the street, the metal barricades. I'm solo up here. I'm about 300. I'm backing off. So north to the alley, you got enough people there to back you up. I'm going south. You got about 50 guys behind me. Okay. Jack 30, Mark 1 in custody, 53K, possession of a switchblade knife. We could make multi-arrests here if we so choose, for dispersal orders. Okay, they're all traveling on H. Henry against traffic from 15th. South H, West South H. We've made 5 or 6 traffic admonishments plus the unlawful assembly. If they get in a position, everyone in that group is arrestable. Tom, we have nobody here. We've been following these guys by ourselves. That's fine, thank you. Not at 40, be advised, the forces that I have here, we're not going to be able to hold these guys if we can get another team of horses here. Do we have an ETA for a squad to arrest these guys? They're analyzing vehicles as they go. We're the only 2 officers here. 14th and H. Henry. I'll get some platoons here and wagons. We'll start heading your way. Okay, we're going to kind of keep them moving. Forward command, their radio traffic indicates they still want to go to the IMAX. Mike 30, you copy? We have the female in custody with the slingshot. We're at 15th and J. Need a booking team. The radio traffic indicates they're heading back to the IMAX again. When they're crossing J, continue southbound 12. They're going to meet up with about 40 or 50 or so at K King and 12. Force y'all, I'm going to send you the red platoon to make some arrests when you go over there. 4-0 from someone, they're throwing some type of rocks at some buildings here, and they're making a mad dash southbound 12 now. They're running southbound, approaching K King on 12. They're going to meet up with another group. Division 2, several subjects have orange balloons. Blue 30, it looks like our crowd here at 12 and K just doubled. It looks like more of the radical element. Air 1, I'm guessing about 200 at this time. 200, 12 and K King. If the goal is to make arrests, we can take 12th Street and basically we'll have an arrestable area. But I have absolutely no personnel with me, besides Sergeant Valdez and myself, to contain this area. Further on the east side, light standard, climbing the standard, 12th and K. When we need that team at J and 11 to move down to K and eastbound. Tom 4, clear the air. We're coming in from the south. We're marching them in right now. Give me 2 minutes for the dispersal order again. Just got fresh information. 1-6 and P-Paul report that they're heading to Starbucks. They're to trash the Starbucks.
Mayor, I'm finding it distracting.
Me too.
Audience reaction. They could be.
We have a request for if the audience could be a little bit quieter, that would help us be able to hear what's going on, and everyone will have a chance to speak.
Good evening, Sacramento City Council members. My name is Jonathan Mraz. As a member of the Sacramento community, let me extend my gratitude for a job well done by our local and state law enforcement officials during the USDA Ag Conference. Although there were many, the large number of uniforms were needed to prevent total anarchy or chaos from reigning supreme in Sacramento. All during the demonstration, I had been taking photographs and walking alongside the protesters. Most of the people I was capturing with my lens were engaged in peaceful, lawful activity. There were, however, reports of illegal acts taking place away from the parade route. Nearly 60 protesters caused over $3,000 worth of damage. That's much less than 1% of the property damage caused by protesters in Seattle a few years ago. The proactive response of our law enforcement agencies is to be commended for their outstanding service to this community and for acting as a role model for other police agencies to follow should the need arise. Thank you.
In their own words. In the afternoon, over 1,000 people descended on downtown and executed roving, decentralized actions converging on the convention center where the WTO trade show was happening. The building was briefly surrounded and all traffic in and out halted. Fences were pulled down, dumpsters pushed into the street, and political messages tagged on walls and windows. In other words, you broke the law, vandalized private property, disregarded other people's rights, and all this the day before your permitted protest. And now you question why the police presence.
I'm Mike Sarkissian, a 50-year resident of Sacramento. I believe in free speech, but the dumping of grain onto 16th Street in mid-commute traffic doesn't constitute speech. Its only purpose is to harass the citizenry. This is just one of the things that our police department prevented during the demonstrations a few months back. Listening to the police radio and the demonstrators' own radio broadcast as a part of the Community Watch effort, I had the opportunity to hear firsthand what was happening. Dumpsters turned over in the streets, barriers moved to disrupt traffic. Demonstrators jumping on the hoods of vehicles do not constitute free speech. In one case, a demonstrator assaulted a television cameraman and jammed the camera into his face. Later, that same demonstrator claimed falsely that the cameraman had assaulted her. While there can be no doubt that many of the protesters were peaceful, among them were many who were not, in particular those who dressed in black and covered their faces. The organizers did nothing to prevent these folks from spray painting vehicles or trying to crash the site of the conference. In fact, all they did was protect them. I sympathize with many of the concerns demonstrators had about genetically engineered foods, but their stated methods as well as their actions were not based on free speech, but designed to shut down the conference and tie up the city.
Madam Mayor, ladies and gentlemen of the Council, Chief Nahara, and those who may be viewing this presentation on another occasion. My name is Dave Janae. I'm a Midtown resident and a proud member of Sacramento Community Watch. The images that you've just viewed and the police audio you heard may refute many of the claims that you'll hear from others. Those allegations are critical of our police department, our officers, and the city's handling of the United States Department of Agricultural Conference hosted in Sacramento. Let's face it, they come from protesters, some of whom's only purpose is to disrupt each of these events in cities around the globe. Now, you'll hear from people, many who are dedicated to their cause and passionate in their beliefs. What we don't hear from them is condemnation for and renunciation of Eugene anarchists or black bloc domestic terrorists who swarm host cities, leaving destruction, injured police and civilians in their wake. The evidence is in the sound and images that opened this presentation. You heard for yourself what it took for overwhelmed police to regain control of our city. What if they didn't have those resources? Well, they did. And they used them with far greater restraint than that of the protesters.
Thank you, Mr. Janae. Okay. That's done. Our next speakers then will be Dr. Arlene Prigoff, Lauren Ayers, Gail Ryall, or maybe it's Ryall, Mary Lou McNeil, and then Pat Driscoll. And then we'll get back to Mr. Hastings and a few others. Hi.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak. My name is Arlene Prigoff. I'm a professor at the Division of Social Work at California State University. I'm also a member of the Alliance for Democracy and a number of other local organizations. I'm here to urge the City Council to rescind the parade ordinance under consideration here, because its measures, which followed in the shadow of the National Patriot Act, are functioning to project fear of members of the community as potential terrorists who need to be constrained in parades and demonstrations in their signs and banners. The right to assemble and to express dissent from policies and programs that are considered or adopted by various levels of government are among the most basic and precious components in the Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights. Public protest is a heritage that was fundamental to the establishment of a democratic society in our nation and essential to the preservation of democratic institutions and processes of free speech. The parade ordinance that is now under review here threatens to undermine and disempower the peaceful freedom of thought that we cherish by seeking to control the signs that express our views and issues at parades and demonstrations. The constructive remedies for fear in times of crisis, because we are nationally and on a global level, the United States is involved in crisis at the present time. And the constructive remedies for fear are truth, courage, and love, compassion. We as citizens must speak truth to power and expose errors and culpability of persons holding office in the government of our society. I think many of us, and certainly I, have some critical views in regard to some national policies.
Dr. Prigoff, I need to
and that is our sacred...
I'm sorry, but you're past your 2 minutes. I need to ask you to bring it to a conclusion.
You're saying I've already used up my time? Okay, if I could just conclude with the final statement. True security depends on healthy relationships between people in the state, and measures that attempt to achieve false security through intimidation of the public can result in the establishment of a police state that protects the wealthy from injustices and abuse that are imposed on the public locally, nationally, and globally. And I care about this city, I care about our country, and I think that it's very important that we base our relationships with free speech and with public protest on respect for citizens. And as has been said before, we have laws that govern use of assault with bricks, stones, and so forth. We don't need those. We already have them. Thank you. I hope that you have confidence in the people who live in this city and in our country.
Thank you, Doctor. Lauren Ayers will be our next speaker.
The slide presentation said that the organizers did nothing to stop vandalism. We had parade monitors and pink posters that totally opposed any kind of violence. I'd like to remind you that COINTELPRO should warn you that there could be saboteurs in the group. In fact, I heard later that there was the cell phone number of one of the so-called black bloc anarchists was traced to the FBI block of cell phones. I'm working on getting some information on that. So please don't paint all of us because of some provocateur. The thing that I really wanted to say is dissent is the highest form of patriotism. It wasn't Karl Marx who said that. It was President Thomas Jefferson. Sociologists who study corporations report that the most successful organizations have executive teams that encourage divergent opinions. That can be applied to all types of government also. Supposedly, the first parade ordinance was meant to keep the peace, but what were the hidden motivations behind that ordinance? The key to good journalists is to follow the money. Wouldn't it be great to have a justification for all that expensive SWAT equipment, or an excuse to get more of that paraphernalia? Think of all the overtime pay for city, county, and CHP officers. I hear that the demonstration cost Sacramento hundreds of thousands of dollars, and in these hard times, we could have put that money to other uses. I tell my students that no matter how great a teacher I am, their best teacher is their own mistakes. I hope everyone in this room, but especially those of you who have been entrusted to vote tonight, will ask themselves this question: can I learn from my mistakes? It's a fool who won't learn from history, and it's truly a brave and wise person who can admit a mistake and rescind this ordinance. Let's talk about fear. When you look at the history books, you see that Joe McCarthy, Lester Maddox in Georgia, President Nixon were wrong on the issues, and they used fear tactics to scare the rest of us into going along with their game plans. You'll recall that city councils, just like you, enforced little drinking fountains that said whites only and colored, and they were the law, and they were wrong, and we should undo wrong mistakes like that. Not only should this ordinance be rescinded, but we should encourage people to gather and to protest the crooked politicians in Washington. Don't be manipulated out of fear-mongering or flag-waving. Question the experts who claim that people with differing opinions are dangerous.
Thank you, Ms. Ayers. Gail Ryle. And after that will be Mary Lou McNeil. Pat Driscoll.
I'm Gail Ryle. I'm the past president of the Sacramento chapter of the Coalition of Labor Union Women, which is a national organization affiliated with the AFL-CIO. This ordinance assumes that any parade or demonstration will turn into a riot. You can't have small, hard objects that can be thrown, that's a quote from the revision, because you might throw them. You can't have glass bottles because you might break them. You can't have poles because you might poke or beam someone. You can't have operational gas masks so you won't be protected from tear gas. All this before any riotous activity takes place, or even if it never does. People are not supposed to be judged guilty before they do anything. Of course, this law isn't used for every parade. Many marches have taken place since June of 2003, and I'm not aware of anyone arrested under this law or even searched for violations of it since then. The law is supposed to apply equally to everyone, but this law is used only against some demonstrations. The way it's been used, the St. Patrick's Day parade won't turn into a riot, it assumes, but one organized by an environmental group or a peace group or an anti-agribusiness group, that it is assumed could. This is profiling, not racial profiling, but by political belief, and it's unconstitutional, and I urge you to rescind it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary Lou McNeil.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. My name is Mary Lou McNeil. I'm the Veterans Affiliated Council Parade Committee Chair for this year, and I'm also Executive Director for Vietnam Veterans of America, Chapter 500. First of all, the VAC would like to thank the council members, especially Dave Jones and Mayor Fargo, for supporting the parade and the City of Sacramento. And all those, I know some of the council members have attended the parades, and we thank you for that. And we really thank you for your support. But we do have objections to this ordinance. The only piece of evidence I found used that indicated the possibility of violent events occurring in the Sacramento was the Seattle Ag event. This was used as evidence in regard to demonstrations, not for normal parades. We know of no violent events occurring in Sacramento's scheduled parades, St. Patrick's, Veterans Day, Memorial Day. We feel you are lumping these items together. Scheduled parades are an item unto themselves. They are events that require no objection from the public, per se. If the public doesn't like the purpose of the parade, they just don't come. Demonstrations are normally where contention between two groups are differing, either on their opinions and that's where the possibility of, actually exists to create violence. While there may be some need for permitting process or spontaneous demonstration rules, etc., to be changed, this is merely an administrative thing, we think, and should not be part of the same ordinance as parades. It would appear that most of the public opinion is against this ordinance, or at least the major portions of it, for various reasons, from reading the staff report. So why does the council staff consistently draft rules and regulations that your voters are against? It also appears that the staff council has not attended many of the parades that honor veterans, because it doesn't appear to be any consideration of items used in these types of parade in the ordinance. We don't find using ordinances from other cities justification for this ordinance. Sacramento is its own city. Being the capital of the state, Sacramento should be a leader, not a follower. An ordinance should be drafted that does not punish all of the people of Sacramento, but just put teeth in enforcing laws that are already on the books. Representing the VAC in regard to the annual Memorial Day and Veterans Day parades, we object to item number 1 in the ordinance regarding what is considered a weapon. While an exemption is made for law enforcement, service members, and National Guard, we see none made for parades honoring veterans. Combined with number 4, the metal prohibitions, and number 9, the projectile launchers, this would not allow many normal activities in Memorial Day or Veterans Day parade. We would like to consider what this means. Flags are on metal poles. I don't think we can take all the flags off and put them on PVC. Color guards carry rifles. ROTC groups and their drill teams carry rifles. Patriotic groups and representational groups carry the rifles. While one of these are just representational of real weapons, they can be considered a rifle or a weapon under the metal or other type of weapon rules. We have a Civil War representation group and they have representational firing of their muskets, and the crowd enjoys it. And what are we to do about the 21-gun salute to veterans? You have to have the rifle with the projectile. I'm sorry. In closing, many of the council members have attended our parades. We think that you can see that weapons, per se, of those that have attended, that are used in the parades are no danger to the public. So we ask that either exemptions be made for parades to honor veterans and maybe other parades that use these things, or that you just do not pass this ordinance in its entirety. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McNeil. And actually, when I went through some of the comments which you made, I had written down some of these as well, because having just been, I thought back to several parades that I had either been a part of or witnessed, and I wrote down high school ROTC students' flags, because even the flag behind us that would not be allowed to be carried in a parade. So I think you've raised some excellent points. We appreciate that. Mr. Jones, do you have questions for the speaker?
Well, I thought she raised excellent points as well, and I wanted to hear from the staff.
I was going to have the staff respond at the end to everything, and I think that's part of. Is that all right with you, Mr. Jones, or do you want to hear it?
Well, I think it's
fresh
at the forefront of my mind.
Mr. Little, go ahead, take a stab at it. We'll make an exemption here.
With regard to the items that that Ms. McNeil raised specifically?
Yes, actually, we're going to ask Chief Nahara to come up and respond to some of those items, because really it's a law enforcement concern as to whether those items would be a hazard to individuals either in the parade or to the participants who are watching the parade. But primarily, just from the perspective of hearing those items, we've had some discussions about allowing veterans, allowing people who are honoring veterans to carry such items. If we need to tinker with the language a little bit, we'll definitely need to take that into consideration.
Let me jump in briefly, so I don't want to preempt the chief, but one of the issues that comes up is you must have a content-neutral set of regulations, and there is a Ninth Circuit case where a city attempted to create an exception for Veterans Day parades from a weapons restriction, and the court said that was not permissible. They did say it would probably be permissible to have an exception for police and military who, as part of their job, are obligated to carry weapons, and you'll find that in a number of other jurisdictions, including Washington, D.C. But that is, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. So if you're placing restrictions on weapons, that applies across the board.
I appreciate that.
I think we about covered it. We did,
I think so.
as Mr. Little said earlier, we did have a lot of discussions on those during the development of this, on that very matter, and the city attorney advised just like you just did.
Okay, but the import of that then is that we can
significantly
not
change
have
parade.
a
That's right.
veterans exception, and it would significantly change the character of the Veterans
Absolutely.
Memorial Day parades, because if I'm reading the ordinance correctly, then none of the items that Ms. McNeil described, which are traditionally elements of those parades, as each of us has seen from our participation or viewing those parades, would be permissible.
Yes, the ordinance is written, that's correct. And just on the issue of enforcement, there is a need for, as a general rule, uniform enforcement of those regulations. It's not dependent on the nature of the event. It's just dependent upon those items being carried.
So in even plainer English, the chief can't use whatever discretion is this won't be plainer English, actually, this will be worse. But the chief can't use whatever discretion is vested in him or her to, on a case-by-case basis, make those kinds of judgment calls that would otherwise be precluded in the ordinance itself.
The rules should be applied across the board, and in situations where they have been applied selectively as to groups that have a threat of violence, whether right, center, or left, that application has been declared unconstitutional.
So does the staff or the city attorney have any other suggestions with regard to how we resolve this particular conundrum? You're being prompted.
I mean, there are ways to restrict the weaponry, for lack of a better term, that you're regulating, but there's not a way to create an exception for particular types of events. It's a difficult issue.
It's a very difficult issue. Thank you.
Mr. Kahn?
Yeah, Mayor, those were some of the questions I have. What I'm puzzled by, we've had two parades, a Veterans Day and a Memorial Day parade that I attended, and there may have been others, but I'm specifically aware of those two. So how do you explain then that this ordinance was in effect, not with some of the changes, but in fact with harsher language than is contained in the proposed amendment? So given this interpretation, I'm unclear then how we then proceeded with that ordinance and allowed that parade to, both of those to be conducted. Was there some other rationale used or what?
At the time when those two parades took place, this ordinance was under review. But that said, we believe that we had the discretion to take that into consideration, unless the chief has any new information.
We need to fix this problem. We cannot have an ordinance that does not allow us to have a Veterans Day or Memorial Day parade or other ceremonial parades of the type that have been described. So we definitely need to fix that problem. Have other cities come up with any solution to this, or are you not aware of any?
Other than allowing rifles to be in parades, which you can call out for. There was a reference to certain drill teams. Those drill teams generally do not have operational weapons. They're replicas, so we would not classify those as weapons. But the muskets that were referred to, that's something that we can definitely take a look at and come back to the council.
I'll have more questions later on this. Thank you.
Mr. Trethewey.
I just have one question in this general discussion, and that is, and maybe I missed it in here, but my grandfather rode in the sheriff's posse, and they had, sharp spurs and all sorts of fancy saddles and ropes and such. Is that addressed at all in this ordinance? I didn't see it addressed.
No, there's no discussion of lariats or spurs or anything that you just mentioned.
Or allowing horses in a parade or not.
Or horses are not prohibited at all.
Okay, thank you.
We'll get back to public testimony now. Pat Driscoll.
Good evening, Mayor Fargo and City Council members, and thank you for allowing me to spare a few moments with you, sharing some thoughts. My name is Pat Driscoll, and I am an elected member of the Sacramento Green Party County Council and the Green Party candidate for the 5th Congressional District. I've been a resident in Sacramento for 4 years, and I'm a veteran, an independent businessman, and I participated in a lot of the demonstrations here in Sacramento. And I have 3 points that I want to make. First, the official Sacramento Green Party position on the ordinance is to repeal the parade ordinance. Second, the video that you saw previously, I think, supports our position, which is nothing that happened in that video could not have been addressed with existing law. The police had all the powers they needed for every act described on that video to take appropriate action. No additional ordinance was needed to support police action. And I think something else that came out of that video, the early parts of it, which brings me to my third point, is that the police were unprepared. Now, I've been to lots of demonstrations in San Francisco where the Sacramento police have had very large demonstrations, and they're trained and they know how to manage order in those circumstances. And I think the issue here before us in Sacramento, with all due respect to the chief of police, is a police training issue, how to use existing law to deal with demonstrations. And, the video tends to support that view. There was a lot of talk about police having to move and to deal with certain circumstances, and that supports that. Now, I personally attended both community meetings on the parade ordinance. At neither meeting was there a police representative. And so we were not really, at the meeting with the city staff, unfortunately, I think there was something had come up, and the police representative was supposed to be there, couldn't make it. And at the community meeting that was held at the Hart Senior Center, there was no police representative to address this issue. And I think that's something that the City Council should consider as an alternative to this draconian ordinance, is to focus on assisting the Sacramento police to get proper training and dealing with mass demonstrations like in San Francisco, which has no ordinance of this type. So I just want to leave you with a thought that please protect our civil liberties, repeal this ordinance, and I would suggest to take a focus on assisting the Sacramento Police Department with appropriate training to deal with these sorts of demonstrations under existing law. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Driscoll. Okay, our next group of speakers will be Jim Hastings, followed by Keith Anthony, Chris Darrow, Jim Morch, and Gail Morgan.
Thank you, Mayor, City Councilman. I'm frankly amazed because I wasn't bothered by what was going on here until I heard the laughter when these films were shown. That's frightening. I'm here to represent people who live here. My name is Jim Hastings. I've lived in this community for 15 years. Past president of the McKinley-Elvis Neighborhood Alliance, past president of the East Sacramento Chamber of Commerce. You don't see this room full of us saying, keep this ordinance, because we think you have the good sense to keep this ordinance. The naive comment that says, this is simply a nice group of people out for a walk is naive. A flagpole is a flagpole until it drops below shoulder level, and then it's a weapon. A cane is a cane when it's used below the waist. Above the waist, it's a club. A crutch is a crutch under the arm until it too drops and gets above the waist, and then it becomes a weapon. You'd ban guns, but not clubs. How about mace? That was there. How about cans of paint sprayed on people and cars and buildings? You saw a picture of George Koufasimas taking the words F-U-C-K off his buildings. Lovely stuff in East Sacramento between 36th and 38th Street on J, on the south side of the street. The demonstrators didn't stay downtown, you see, because they weren't carrying their signs, they were creating signs on buildings. Let's not be naive here. This chief and his group did an outstanding job of protecting this city when they had failed in other cities. And to have some dude stand up here and say they weren't organized is ridiculous. They were organized and they were successful, but they didn't stop it all. A pocket full of rocks is not a problem. The minute you carry a pocket full of rocks, I want to know what the devil you're carrying them for. A pocket full of batteries is not a problem. But why? You see, it is the use of the weapon. And if we believe that these public demonstrations of patriotism are not going to be infiltrated by protesters who are violent, you're wrong. They will be. This is a new world. This is not 1950.
Mr. Hastings, I need you to bring it to a conclusion. Thank you. Keith Anthony?
Mayor Fargo, City Councilman, City Council people, I've kind of changed the tack that I want to take. I am President and Chairman of Sac Town Hall, and also with us is Crimewatch and Patriot Watch, two local organizations concerned with crime. I want to congratulate the council for enacting this ordinance in the first place. As you said, Mayor Fargo, this was heavily influenced upon the WTO riots in Seattle. And I think Mr. Driscoll, his comment that the police were unorganized, perhaps he would agree with me that we should further alter this ordinance in increasing police force and, as well as Mr. Driscoll said, increase the training for the police as well. This ordinance has been embraced by the local community, by the local merchants as a measure to protect and also to provide punitive measures to those who would seek other than peaceful protests. This ordinance is also not targeted at the peaceful protests. Most of the people here are peaceful protesters, one of which them who is not is Mr. Driscoll, who on his website proudly states that he is proud of his criminal record in some of his civil disobedience. This is for the small minority of people who get out of hand. We cannot just make the assumption that mob mentality will not riot. It's far too dangerous for this community and for these citizens to assume it's not going to happen and be ill-prepared for it. The cost of protection for this community and for this city far outweighs the cost of repairing and rebuilding from violent protesters. So as chairman of Sac Town Hall, and I speak also for many of the merchants and citizens of this community, I respectfully ask for your reenactment of this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anthony. Is Chris Darrow here, our next speaker? Okay, thank you, Chris. Jim March, or March, I'm not sure if your A is an O or your O is an A.
Oh, it's March. Thanks
March.
a lot.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I appreciate your allowing me to speak. I'm in an unusual position because I'm a registered lobbyist for a nonprofit organization based in Washington State. I'm not here on behalf of that organization. I'm here on my personal behalf as a Sacramento downtown resident and to support my good friend Dave Janae and Crimewatch. However, there is a tie, and I'll show it to you in a minute, between my lobbying activities and what I'm here to speak on. I'm here basically in support of the ordinance and of the minor changes planned out of the chief's office. I think you are going to have to confront the issue of flagpoles. I would actually suggest a numeric limit of 3 flagpoles per parade plus 1 for every 15 people or something like that. Flagpoles are not your primary problem at the video you saw at the last bio protests. The biggest problem you had was rocks, projectiles of various kinds, spray paint, those sorts of things. Now, for me to speak in favor of a restriction on those kinds of weapons at parades is kind of unusual because I'm the California field rep for the Citizens Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms. I'm here in support of a weapons ordinance. That's kind of weird. The reason I am is these are not weapons of legitimate self-defense or self-defense of any sort, and I personally am, as you can imagine, a proponent of lawful self-defense. These are weapons of mass annoyance. The items that you're really trying to restrict here are weapons designed to disrupt, annoy, harass, and cause property damage, and to distract the police from responding to property damage problems. The TV cameras, the media, are always going to point their cameras at whatever's stupid is going around. And there's some of these people that want the cameras pointed at them, and they're going to do stupid things in order to do that. So restrictions of the sort you're talking about are necessary because when you've got disparate groups spread all over the city trying to cause problems, the only way the police can deal with them is to stop them before they do property damage to local businesses, local residents, people, and property. You have to stop them before that. Okay. So I understand. I would make a suggestion that on flagpoles, simply limit the number based on the number of people in the parade, a ratio of people to flagpoles. I think that's your best solution, personally.
Thank you for the suggestion. Mr. Morgan, or Gail Morgan? Sorry.
My name is Gail Morgan. I'm a resident of the downtown, or the Midtown area. I'm the vice chair of the Libertarian Party, Sacramento County. Then you look at the issue you've got before you here of how to handle the protesters, what to do about the weapons they might have. A couple things come into consideration. Number one, I really hope you guys take care of this because I don't want it bumped up to the state or the federal level. We need to keep these type of regulations here at the city level, and we need to keep control of them. The Patriot Act is a real good example of that. You voted to oppose the Patriot Act as a body. Given that consideration, consider the fact that you need to take action on this and hold this in the hands of the city and not pass it up the line. I support prohibition of certain devices in parades. I am a strong proponent of civil liberties. Civil liberties are very important to the individual who lives along the parade route and has a business along the parade route. And anytime there is damage to an individual, it is important that retribution is enacted, and the police is the logical organization to step in and mediate that and arrest the malefactor and bring things into compliance and eventually through the court system bring a means of retribution and reimbursement or restitution to the victim. And, you know, when you're starting to make these laws and say, okay, what's going to be allowed and what's not allowed, we need to consider the individual person who lives here, not the people that come from another town, not the people that come from San Francisco or Washington State or from Washington, D.C. We need to worry about the people that live in this city. We need to protect the people in this city from the people from other areas so that they are not causing harm to our city. And this is why I support this ordinance.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Richard Cohen, and then Dean Johansson, John Burton, Thomas Pritty, and Paula Lamazzi. Mr. Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor Fargo, and thank you, members of the council, for giving me this opportunity. When thinking about this issue, I've spent quite a bit of time looking over the ordinance itself, and I tried to get myself educated as to what's happened in the past. I didn't go to the USDA demonstration. I did see a video of it. I went to the Heart Center community meeting and listened to the various people. Primarily, about 95% object to the ordinance. And I also listened to the police chief as he gave his summation of why he felt this ordinance was important. And I thank you all for that input. I think the chief, one of the things that stood out in my mind that he said, in fact, the major thing, was that he said he felt that when looking at this matter historically, he said there was the possibility of some violent actions. Well, of course, we're all concerned about the possibilities of violent actions wherever they may occur. Clearly, when you use law, that is a very draconian thing to bring forth when it's needed. Okay. My concern here is that there is a reaction going on, very similar to what we see on the national level. This, in a sense, like the Patriot Act was a reaction to 9/11, this is a similar type of reaction to fear. We've seen a lot of the fear in the video. I saw a lot of the fear in the video that I saw of the parade. It seemed very ominous to see all these armed police force and all these protesters. I didn't see a lot of violence. I'm not sure there was much violence, but the possibility of it seems like a very thin reason to enact what seems to be, I would say, preemptive law. Okay. We have law. You all know that. We're quite well equipped to deal with violence when it occurs. So the possibility of violence seems like a very poor reason to put ourselves in this kind of position to give us more law that we really don't need. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Johansson?
I'm Dean Johansson. I'm a local attorney. I'm also a member of the Sacramento chapter of the NAACP and a member of its Legal Redress Committee. I'm also on the board of both the Yolo County and the Sacramento chapters of the ACLU. All three organizations have voted to rescind this ordinance. Speaking also on behalf of one that participated in the so-called protests, and one that has participated in protests since the June ministerial 2003 protests. I think that actually it's you, Mr. Cohen, that made the most lucid comments that I heard tonight from the council members. And specifically, that went to the issue of why this ordinance hasn't been enforced since June. I myself, for example, the 12th of August, was involved in a protest concerning the Supreme Court's decision to knock down the gay marriages in San Francisco. While I was in that march, at least half of those individuals were carrying glass containers with candles in them. And I asked myself also, and also a spontaneous demonstration. This happened as a result of a decision that very day. There was no ability to get a permit. When you look at this empirically from a practical standpoint, it is impossible to obey this ordinance. The ordinance, the comments from Mr. Cohen went directly to the main issue I see here, which is unequal enforcement. And that's what's happening here. Really what you've done is that you, in passing this ordinance, have singled out content, specific free speech. It was the black bloc that this was intended to address. And the problem is that at one point in time or another, it is every one of our turns in the barrel. Whether it's the Jews, whether it's gays, whether it's blacks, whether it happens to be the black bloc. We all have our turn. And at some time, at some point, it'll be used to address a certain specific class of people for the content of their speech. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. John Burton.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor and City Council. My name is John Burton. I'm a longtime Sacramento resident. And I trust that you will maintain keen, rational minds in the arguments being made here today. And we're all pointing out that this ordinance does nothing to prevent, it is not needed to prevent illegal activities, which people are concerned about. And so clearly we do need to enforce existing laws. I don't believe this ordinance does anything to take care of the problems that people are afraid of here. Simply rescind the ordinance would be the solution. In detail, I just want to use the rest of my time to educate you about this ordinance that you have adopted mistakenly. This is the thinnest piece of wood I brought up to you. It's actually 1/16 of an inch too thick for your ordinance. Turns out if you buy the smallest piece of wood you can get at Home Depot, it's too thick for your 1/4 inch requirement on handles. So I'll pass this around so you can see how thick that is. And whether you think that's something you want to prescribe as something dangerous. The next thickness is 3/8, okay? Just another piece of lead. So that's 1/8 of an inch too big. And think about if you want to get your message out, you don't have a lot of money to make a billboard. Maybe this is the only way of getting your message out. You've got to hold the sign on something. This is 1/2 inch, also not allowed. So in other words, none of these sticks I gave you are allowed in the ordinance that you adopted mistakenly. Now here, the other part is about another way to hold a sign. Plastic. This is it says right here, 1/2 inch pipe. It turns out 1/2 inch is the interior diameter and 1/8 inch wall. It's a pretty hard pipe, actually. But if you compare it to the larger pipe, which was called a 3/4 inch pipe, but it's actually 1 inch on the outside diameter. But this is the 1/16 inch wall. Actually, this one, I'd say, is less dangerous because the smaller wall. But even those plastic pipes, are neither one of which is allowed in your ordinance, because the one that's 1/2 inch is actually a 1/16 of an inch larger than 3/4 of an inch on the outside diameter. So what are we to do to put our signs on something? Now let me just conclude. You need to rescind this ordinance and simply do a good job enforcing the law and protecting our civil liberties. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And Lauren didn't mean to get the creeps. It just happens sometimes. Is Thomas John Pretty here? And then Paula Lamazzi. Then we'll be calling on David Topaz, Jose Del Toro.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council people, for letting me talk here tonight. I was at the Hart Senior Center, and we had 61 angry people come out in against this ordinance. And we were told at that meeting that, quote, all this would be brought to the council. I didn't hear anything tonight about the outpouring of the anger at that meeting. And again, there was no, Max Fernandez was the Neighborhood Services was there. We had the city attorney there. And it was a very heated discussion for about 2 hours in a tiny little room because they expected nobody to show. But we had 61 people crammed into a tiny room about the area where you're sitting. And it was very outstanding. But under your ordinance, if you have a parade and you just came back from, say, Rite Aid, Safeway there in Alhambra, and you have a grocery cart, your own private grocery cart, not one that you've taken from the store. And under the selective ordinance, oh, you stopped at Rite Aid, you picked up spray paint for spray painting. Oh, that's a weapon. Oh, you got a glass bottle. And everything is in groceries. But under selective enforcement, everything that you have in that basket be, quote, something to arrest you for. So, how are you going to do your shopping if you can't go to the store and bring back the items that are legally used for other purposes? If you go for selective enforcement, you're going to say almost everything you use in everyday life is going to be selective. So the only way that I can say that you could get around this ordinance is vote on November 2nd and That's the peaceful way to do it. Thank you.
Mayor, I have a
Thank
question.
you. Oh, yes. Of Mr. Pretty or of staff? Mr. Pretty?
I just had a question. I mean, what I'm struggling with is it does seem to me, though, that there's some category of objects for which it's hard to imagine they'd have a necessary or appropriate use in a parade, like the wrist rocket, slingshot devices that are, yeah, exactly. And so, and carrying a brick in a parade. I mean, right. And so, I think what I'm struggling with is where that dividing line is, and perhaps this errs too far on one side, but the thing that concerns me is we've also got to give some thought to the people who are watching the parade, or the people alongside the parade route, or the police officers who are trying to maintain public safety, who could be the target of those sorts of objects. And it would be helpful to me. I understand that everyone is opposed. A lot of people are opposed to it and they want to rescind it outright. But it'd be helpful to me to know whether there's some class of objects which there would be some agreement on as to their lethal nature and their inappropriate use in a parade. I mean, I would challenge a speaker to tell me what right would someone have to carry a wrist rocket slingshot in a parade? I mean, what possible constructive use could that be put to? And maybe I'm missing one, but same thing with a brick. So so it'd be I mean, we can have this polarized debate all night, but it'd be helpful if there'd be some dialogue about whether there's some class of objects that the opponents would agree probably shouldn't be carried in a parade. Now, if you don't agree with that, that's fine too, but it'd be interesting to hear. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but you want to come up to the mic? I'm sorry.
Yeah, you need to speak on the mic. And
I would say what you said earlier about weapons that are already on the books as far as things you shouldn't carry is fine. I see nothing wrong with that. But when you say ceremonial rifles that don't fire, even if they don't fire, it's still a weapon because it becomes, quote, a big stick.
Absolutely.
Something to hit somebody with. And even if it doesn't fire a bullet, it's still a lethal weapon. You talk about a little stick, a little piece of pipe for a protest. But boy, you have a rifle 4 or 5 feet long. That is a formidable weapon that you can really whack a lot of people with. So it's hard to say. How are you going to control what you allow and what you don't allow? Unless you make all the weapons out of foam, make them look like rifles.
Thank you, Mr. Pretty.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, thank you. Thanks.
Paula Lamasi will be our next speaker.
Yeah, I've never worked this before, but I have some pictures I wanted to share that help, demonstrate.
Would you pull one of the microphones down so we can hear what you're saying?
Okay.
There you go.
So I just turn this on
Yes.
right here? Yeah. Let's see. Does that come on? Just a second. There we go. Okay, I want that down right here. Okay, I just want to add some pictures of some regular parades, and right here she's carrying the key to the city. That's illegal. So her and her 2 heralding horn blowers go to jail. And we have scepters, saxophones, horns, batons, illegal, and throw those princesses right over here in jail. And then are these children's accomplices of the crime of holding a maypole? And this violator, wait, we got that here.
It'll focus on its own if you leave it for a second.
Okay. This violator, subsection 4, looks like a Frenchman with a beret and maybe a hippie too. Let's check each one of those balloons for nitrous oxide. Is a knight in shining armor illegal? This is the body vest. And then I didn't know if her mask would be considered, functional gas mask, but it would be really good if we could make it illegal for enforcement officers to not to possess or carry irritating, noxious, or poisonous gases. And I don't know if that one is anything to worry about. But then President Bush seems to like confetti. He might not appreciate you making a law against confetti cannons. And this one right here, I don't think this one is any concern right now, the shovel thing. So, right. Anyway, the point I want to make is if your motives are to make laws to prevent anything from possibly ever going wrong, be careful that you don't also prevent things from going right. Think first about nurturing the goodness of our citizens and our community. Think twice before imposing restrictions that would instill fear of arrest by participants with no intentions of doing harm. And last June, you may have mistook the ad conference protesters as a criminal element. And if you learn about the genetic engineering and the dangers this untested, unrecallable experimental agriculture poses on our food security and our farmers and our families' health, then you'll reassess who the criminal element was. Then you'll know that the protesters were merely practicing good citizenship.
Thank you. Mr. Topaz, Dave Topaz, followed by Jose Del Toro, Efren Gutierrez, Marichal Brown, Chuck O'Neill. Mr. Topaz.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, on behalf of the men and women of the Sacramento Police Officers Association, we'd like to thank you all, along with the city manager and the chief, for your steadfast efforts to protect all of our members and the citizens and businesses in the city. Through the enactment of the parade ordinance, we support the reenactment of the amended ordinance. Our members are proud to protect citizens' rights to freely assemble, speak, and stand up for their beliefs. But we are equally prepared to deal with the few who claim to desire free speech, but really wish to incite violence and destroy property of the entities that they oppose. We appreciate this city government's clear delineation between those expressing their views and those who exploit a peaceful opportunity to gather. My members are willing to fight, be injured, or even die to defend the rights of lawful demonstrators. To minimize that risk and protect law-abiding citizens is what this ordinance is about. Again, we thank you for sticking to the important issues and maintaining this vital protection. And let me add one last quote. From Edmund Burke, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing." Unfortunately, good people who have been part of these protests in the past in other cities have done nothing to prevent the violence that has occurred in a number of cities. Our agency tracked a dozen or more people who had been arrested for felony assault on peace officers in numerous locations in protests of this nature. That was the information we were acting on. We were acting to prevent anybody else, citizen, officer, or business, to suffer a loss because of this conference. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Jose Del Toro, you're our next speaker. Okay. Efren Gutierrez, I see him in the audience.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Well, 2 minutes. Okay. Well, I think you've heard a lot of sides here. And I think a side that hasn't been said is this. For those of us who have grown up here, I protested since I was in high school. Probably should have been locked up a long time ago. I protested then the Vietnam War. Isn't that funny? Isn't that kind of the political topic as of late? Who was there and who wasn't? Well, I'd like to also say that my father fought in Korea, left some blood over there, and he fought for me to be able to stand here and express my freedom, my free speech, my right to demonstrate, my right to protest what you might not agree to. I'm not here for you to agree with me. But you are here as elected officials to do as we ask of you and as we elect you to do. I was at the Heart Center also, as the gentleman said. There was over 61 people. I would say almost 95% said no. What the heck are we doing with this ordinance? Richard Ramirez was there, Max Fernandez. They too could not give us no reason why this ordinance existed. All that, well, we're here to take information. Well, the information was nobody wanted it. You know, right now, it's hard because as a person who represents people of color and people's interests who many times don't get heard, many times that's our only recourse. Because we don't have access to the media. We don't have access to television, to the radio. But we do have access to the streets. We have access to our voice, to our cries, our pleas, to listen to us. If that little sign is the only sign we got to protest, dang it, we're going to show that little sign. And no badge, no matter how big, is going to stop us. And I think you have to understand that we have a great history here in Sacramento. This is the capital. This is where we protest, folks. I don't go to Stockton and protest, or Lodi. What the heck? Folks. So we have to see that. We have to understand that. And Chief, I think you got to understand that this isn't another city. It's Sacramento. And we ask of you to have compassion and love for us and have faith in us that we do the right thing when we protest, because we really come to you from our hearts. I don't think anybody here, all my progressive community, ever shouts and does anything bitter. We do things in the right way. We try to do things in the right way. So please be reasonable and let's rescind this. Let's go back and tweak some other law maybe that needs to be tweaked. But this isn't the one. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Is Marichal Brown here? Am I saying it right? Marichal? Oh, okay. How about Chuck O'Neill? Okay. Actually, before you come up here, I'll ask to just wait for just a moment. City council members, we have this new rule about me asking your permission to go past 10 o'clock. We have about 8 or 9, 10 more speakers left. I would like us, if we can, to hear all those speakers tonight. I'd prefer us to take action tonight. Are people okay with us doing that? Okay, just wanted to check. Thank you for your patience. Mr. O'Neill.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, council people. I want to say, answer to the people who support this law, I really am angry and detest the black bloc. I think their actions destroy the good message that so many of us were trying to get across. And the agricultural thing, we were doing great. We were really getting some good articles that really got to the substance of why people object to genetically engineered food. And then the black bloc came, and now all the attention is on the violence that they were creating. And let's face it, the only reason we're here tonight is because of the black bloc. It was the black bloc who was making these statements on the emails. It was the black bloc who was causing all the problems. And we wouldn't have had this ordinance if it wasn't for the black bloc. Face it, we created this ordinance to give us an excuse to arrest those people before they did anything. This is the United States of America. You're supposed to be innocent until you actually do something. And this ordinance is simply to avoid that so we can arrest somebody before they actually do anything. On top of that, as you've heard many times, this ordinance is poorly written and way too vague and way too broad. The gentlemen over here who were protesting had a spontaneous demonstration right outside here. The policemen were here, the bailiff were here, and nobody did a thing about this spontaneous demonstration, even though they had several items. And I want you to read this carefully. They have brief bags that could be thrown. They have clipboards with pieces of metal on them. Clipboards themselves are illegal because they're more than 3/4 of an inch thick. And metal's not allowed. It's very clear here. Metal's not allowed. That would include a spur. It's very broad and vague. Let me show you. I got in tonight with this. It's more than 3/4 of an inch wide. It's illegal. I got another one. Oh, I got 2 weapons. Oh, metal, not allowed. Something I could throw, not allowed. A cell phone I could throw, not allowed.
Mr. O'Neill, you're past your 2-minute time limit. We appreciate the humor, however. Thank you. Craig Tucker, followed by Joe Bonage. Bonage, thank you. And then Paulette Chula, thank you. Mr. Tucker.
Just thought if it put me further enough down on the list, I might leave, but I've been here since the beginning, and
we
cling
have a
to
long
this
list.
issue. What we're upset about, we will continue to be upset about, is the parade ordinance and how it gets enforced. And I would also just like to point out that the thing that's perplexing to us as progressive activists in the city of Sacramento is actions of the council. When you were able to kind of stand up and do the right thing when the Patriot Act resolution came to you. But I'd like to point out that your resolution opposing the Patriot Act really didn't do anything. It made a statement, but it didn't do anything. When you had a chance to do something in regards to civil liberties, you took them away from us. So I'd like to point that out. Next thing I'd like to say is I think that the activists in this room, the progressive activists and the people who are in favor of this ordinance, have a lot more in common than we have separating us. Vandals should be arrested. People who commit assault and battery should be arrested. A lot of the acts he showed in that video were crimes, but none of those would have been stopped. The ordinance doesn't stop that, and it would not have stopped any of it. What the ordinance does is it allows preemptive strikes against crime. That's the goal of this ordinance. The reality of it is it allows for preemptive strikes against our civil liberties. We have plenty of laws. The ordinance is the most restrictive ordinance in your own city's analysis when it's compared to ordinances in other cities in the state of California. I just don't think we need it. All those things are already illegal. We need to encourage people to exercise their civil liberties, not put a chilling effect on it.
I had a question for the speaker. Those are very compelling arguments. Do they extend to a wrist rocket, a slingshot?
I'm not sure if a wrist rocket is legal outside of a parade. I don't know. I can say that you were asking about the brick earlier. Well, maybe the bricklayers of America want to have a labor rally, and they want to carry a brick. I mean, I don't know.
I've yet to see them do that, but it's an interesting hypothesis.
Well, and I know that if you shot somebody with a wrist rocket, that would be illegal, and you should be arrested for it. But having this sort of preemptive strike of what you might do, it's just you're going to have lawsuits constantly. You came in and you arrested me because I have a wrist rocket. I didn't even use it. You have to let people commit a crime before you arrest them.
Thank you, Mr.
So
Tucker.
you would not want to try.
I really would like to hear the rest of the public testimony.
I understand that, Mayor, but I just want to test this point. So you wouldn't want to even prohibit wrist rockets then?
If wrist rockets are legal already, I don't think they should be made illegal in the terms of the ordinance. If you want to ban wrist rockets, I'm all for banning AK-47s and a lot of other big weapons. And if you want to talk about banning wrist rockets, we can have that conversation.
Okay,
but
thanks.
I don't think it should be explicit for a parade.
Too bad you're not in Congress where we need you. Joe Bonage, and then Paulette Chula, I'm sorry, I just can't say it. Brandon Hartle, Cress Vellucci. Hi.
Mayor, council members, thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight on this. Let's see. This ordinance is not to stifle freedom of speech. It's to protect the citizens, the visitors to the city, the property, our police officers. It's to protect them. And a lot of these things that are in the ordinance, people should know ahead of time they're not supposed to bring these to the events. They can leave them, although there are some things that might need to be changed. I don't have a problem with that. I don't know where you're going to put your car keys when you park down the street. So maybe it does need to be adjusted. But a lot of these things are weapons, and this was made to protect people, not to keep. I'm sure most of these people here don't have bad intentions, and they want to peacefully protest, and they need to have the opportunity to do that. And this is not about that. So if it needs to be reworked, so be it, but I don't agree with rescinding it. So thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Paulette? Oh, okay. I thought she corrected me when I mispronounced her name. Maybe someone else corrected me. Is Brandon Hartle here? Whoever corrected me, thank you. Brandon, I apologize. If I had realized you were a high school senior, I would have called upon you sooner. You should be doing homework or getting ready for bed. But anyway.
My name is Brandon Hartle. I'm a 17-year-old high school student in Rancho Cordova. And even though I live in Rancho Cordova, I spend most of my time in downtown Sacramento. And I have a passion for being down here. It's just an amazing city. And what we have here is just unique to the state. We're the state capital of California. And I think the ordinance goes beyond just the fact that we're the city of Sacramento. It's representing the state. So I would like to advise the council to rescind the ordinance and just start there. And there's other problems with, local laws governing protests and parades and things of that nature, like at the Ag Conference. It wasn't just the ordinance. It was a little unsettling to most of the protesters who were there. But I'd like to advise the council and the mayor to rescind it. And thanks for your time.
Thank you, Brandon. Chris Felucci. And Pamela Van Camp. Keith Wagner. Hi.
Hi. I'm with the Green Party of California. Before I say a few words about the actual ordinance, I did want to say that if we're going to demonize Pat Driscoll for his demonstrations and acts of civil disobedience at the federal building against the Iraq War, then I guess we may as well stand here and demonize Martin Luther King and many other people in this country. I also wanted to say that
most of your council members as well.
Yeah, good point. I also wanted to say that just the other day there was a candlelight vigil to commemorate the 1,000 plus Americans that were killed in Iraq, and that was over near the state capitol on the sidewalk. Most of the people there were in violation of this ordinance because they were holding glass containers that had candles inside of them. Just want to make that point. But basically, one of the things that I've mentioned to Rich in the past, and that was that people keep referring to this as a parade ordinance. I mean, it in fact does not appear to be just a parade ordinance. It in fact seems to also affect demonstrations in traditional public forums, like out on the sidewalk, areas where people traditionally have been able to demonstrate, to hold impromptu, spontaneous, whatever you want to call it, types of demonstrations. So although this says parade ordinance, and I notice that Council Member Jones keeps referring to this parade ordinance, it's not, or it appears to be a lot more than that. So I think that everyone on the council should be aware that this can control or govern or have a chilling effect on not just big parades, but smaller demonstrations by citizens, no matter what their political persuasion. That's pretty much it. I like to say that I was a news reporter here for more than 20 years. I went to law school, didn't finish law school. But I did learn a few things, and that was that if you're a district attorney, you have plenty of laws in this state with which to arrest people. And the job of the police is to arrest people if, in fact, they break the law. Not as in Minority Report, the movie with Tom Cruise, to arrest people when you think they may be breaking the law. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Pamela Van Camp. And then Keith Wagner, Kim Glazard, Stephen Lerman or Lemon? Lerman, thank you. Hi.
Hi. Excuse me. I've spoke before on this subject, and I probably will be repeating myself. When I was involved in the Ag protest, I was leaving. It was after the protest. And I went down 12th Street where a lot of people were leaving because it was the way to the light rail station, and most people came in by light rail. And that's when when I saw the blocking of the path by the police officers and the instant that you saw the girl drop the bottle. I also saw our police surround me, I was a little bit back, but they surrounded us. This was a police action against the city and citizens of Sacramento. And it looked like something out of a movie, and not a very good movie. We worked really hard with the business community, going around to the businesses and telling the businesses to notify their people, to be kind to these people, to not create an environment that would alienate them, because we are a city of protest, that we wanted it to be a peaceful demonstration. And the people here work their butts off trying to create a peaceful environment to diffuse the situation. And I believe they did a great job. And the reason I know they did a great job was because a lot of the people you're protesting were staying at my house. I gave the medics my place to stay so they could protect the interest of the people that were might be injured. They came from all over, all the states, and they were seasoned protesters. But when they left, their comments were that they were so impressed by Sacramento. They would go into the restaurants and they were complimented. And they were treated with respect. And it was because of this that they did not tear up the town. When they came, they kept telling me, oh, there's going to be a lot of trouble. And I kept saying, no, there's not going to be a lot of trouble. You're not going to tear up this town. Because we are going to have a peaceful demonstration. And this is not the kind of town you do that. They went to the restaurants, they saw the little shops, they saw all the little things that make Sacramento what it was, and they just did not want to tear it up. Because Sacramento is exactly what they want. That's the type of city that everybody should be proud of.
Thank you. Keith Wagner.
Mayor, members of the City Council. Am I a criminal? Anybody wearing shoes criminal? Am I a criminal now? What's the choice that the police officer is left with? Thank you.
Thank you. Kim Glazard? Is Kim Glazard still here? Okay. And then Stephen Lerman?
Honorable Mayor and members of the Council. My name is Kim Glazard, and I'm a member of Organic Sacramento. And I'd like to urge the City Council to rescind the current parade ordinance. The timing and creation of the ordinance is highly suspect and infers intentions to disrupt and inhibit Sacramento citizens' expressed rights for free speech. This overreaction to Sacramento citizens' expressions of dissent was not only expressed in the parade ordinance, but also in the inordinate numbers of law enforcement officers on duty during the agricultural ministerial, with a ratio of approximately 1 law enforcement officer for every 2 protesters. Having worked in government agencies for many years, I am aware that it's highly unusual for city, county, and state agencies to spend excessive monies unnecessarily, especially in such economically tenuous times. Whatever the undeclared agenda for the irregularities, the irregularities demonstrated by City Council policy and action during the agricultural ministerial was, I would like to challenge the City Council to adopt a future policy of tolerance, compassion, and understanding, and restore to Sacramento citizens the opportunity to fully exercise their constitutional rights of assembly and dissent by rescinding the parade ordinance. I also I want to offer something. As a member of Organic Sacramento, we have been working to educate the citizens of Sacramento and the community on the dangers of genetic engineering. And we had Jeffrey Smith, author of Seeds of Deception, here over the last couple days. He spoke in Sacramento last night. And we will have another gentleman, Stephen Drucker, coming early October. And I would like to offer to set up a meeting with you to help you understand some of the issues and concerns that we have as a community of citizens. Okay?
Great. Thank you very much. Steve Lerman.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. I'm honored to represent the Sacramento chapter of the ACLU, and they urge the rescinding of the parade ordinance 12-1A. There seems to be no objection to 12-1B about the scheduling of permits. The ordinance is, some people find it to be overly broad and vague, and the city of Sacramento may find itself on the wrong end, unfortunately on the wrong end of a lawsuit in this case. I appreciate the dialogue between Dave Jones and the city attorney concerning the selective enforcement of this regulation, and I would think that selective enforcement amounts to censorship. I have a suggestion. I did attend the Crest Theater where they had a public discussion of the pros and cons of the issue last year, and I think that might be effective in the future to reduce the tension between our city and protesters, and I would hope that the City Council would consider that in the future, to have a public discussion of the matter and possibly even broadcast it on one of our community channels, such as 17. And as said before, vandalism and violence is not free speech. I think we have the regulations to prevent violence and vandalism without this parade ordinance. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Lerman. Okay, that concludes our public testimony for tonight. And I'd like to start by making some comments and then ask my council members. Oh, I'm sorry. Do we have someone in the audience in the Pat? Did you submit a speaker slip?
No, I'm sorry. I didn't plan on speaking, but I have something to say that I think is very important.
Okay, come up and have your 2 minutes. But we do have rules here. I'll need you to fill out a speaker slip. And I appreciate
Good evening,
yours.
Honorable Mayor, City Council. My name is Francisco Dominguez. I'm a photographer, photojournalist. I was born here in Sacramento, lifelong resident. Last spring, community college students from all over the state came and protested at the state capitol on the proposed budget cuts of the governor. And they marched from the Tower Bridge to the Capitol. I was taking photographs. At one point, the state police came and took some signs away from some youth, some African American and Chicano youth, and confronted them and there was a confrontation there about the signs. The youngsters, they were community college students. They were like, "What is going on here? Why are they didn't know what was going on. They were holding signs. These were community college students protesting here at the Capitol. Luckily, I was there, and I told them, I stopped. I said, "Hey, let them take them. Let them take the signs," because I didn't want, because there was going to be a conflict there. There was probably 5,000 students there at that protest, but this was selective enforcement of this ordinance, and so this had come up tonight. I didn't plan to speak here tonight, but I had to say something because this was an event that happened here in our town. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Hammond.
The state police, you mean the California Highway Patrol, since the state police was subsumed by California Highway Patrol?
I think it was the state police.
That would be the California Highway Patrol.
Right.
The state police no longer exist.
Okay, it was the Highway Patrol then.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let me go ahead and make a few comments. I believe that we have to have a parade ordinance. I think that it's important that we are able to plan for gatherings. I think that the permitting process is something we can discuss whether or not how we deal with the spontaneous gatherings, but certainly for large parades, for large gatherings, I think that it is important that we have some sort of a permitting process to handle that. That is part of the parade ordinance, although that's not what we're dealing with here this evening. As I said earlier, and as I think as the Chief said, our goal here is to maintain public safety, to protect public property, but at the same time to protect the rights of citizens to free speech. and I have a lot of faith in our police department and a lot of faith in this chief to do that with the laws as we have them. For me personally, however, I believe that retaining or regaining public trust in government is also a goal. It's one of my personal goals, something which I take very seriously as the mayor of this city. And I'm very concerned about the fact that we had a process that did not result in anything close to consensus, and anything, it doesn't appear to me that we have changed anybody's minds on either side of this through the process that was gone through by staff. Based on everything I've heard tonight and on my reading of the ordinance, and I spent quite a bit of time on that over the weekend, I am not going to be able to support this portion of the parade ordinance. Part of that is due to the very legitimate opposition by some very thoughtful people here tonight and in the past. I do believe we have laws on the books to control violent behavior and inappropriate behavior, and I have faith in our police department in following through with that. I do believe that this ordinance would try to make things illegal that are unenforceable. And just in thinking back to the many events and parades, including the AIDS Walk on Sunday that I attended, there were signs there that were illegal based on this ordinance. Thinking back to the Take Back the Night gatherings that we women do on a regular basis, thinking about the veterans parades and the inability to have flagpoles or ROTC students with their weapons, not being able to have Little League or girls softball carry baseball bats in a parade, or water balloons for that matter. I think that this goes farther than we need to go in Sacramento. I don't think it would be enforceable. It's not just the litigation that I'm assuming would follow if we pass this, but I am not comfortable supporting this ordinance as it's written here tonight. And with that, Mr. Cohen, you're next, and then Ms. Pinnell, and we'll see who else would like to speak.
Yeah, let's clarify something, though. By taking no action tonight, the existing ordinance remains in effect, correct? Rich?
Rich, will you respond?
All right. So I think everyone needs to bear that in mind. And I do think we need to make some adjustments in this ordinance. I agree with the mayor that we need a parade ordinance. I do not subscribe to the theory that we should have no parade ordinance. And I'm not sure if that's what's meant by rescind or just rescind this and adopt a different one. But until we're ready to adopt a different one, I think we need to keep the current one in place as a placeholder, and that puts pressure on both sides to be a little more reasonable in terms of coming up with some compromises. Having said that, I don't expect there to be a compromise, so I think this council is going to have to just make a decision based on opinions that we're hearing throughout the community and the expert advice we get from our own staff. Let me just point out a few things that trouble me that I would like to see brought back with a revised ordinance, and I'm assuming the rest of the council would want to see this come back with some revisions based on testimony here tonight. One is the spontaneous protest provision. I just don't see how that's feasible or enforceable. So we either need to rethink that or just delete that particular requirement and deal with spontaneous protests using other areas of our ordinance. Clearly other activity that's illegal under other provisions we can continue to enforce. In terms of the flag poles, the ceremonial weapons, and so on that were brought up with respect to the Veterans Parade, and I guess there could be others similar, but those certainly are the most notable. We cannot have an ordinance that makes the Veterans Day Parade illegal. So we're going to have to figure that one out. Now, it occurs to me that one way we could I shouldn't say get around, but make this a workable ordinance would be to have these types of items subject to inspection by the chief of police or his designee for safety purposes. And, you know, I think that's something we need to look at so that you can determine whether their use in a particular setting is, in fact, dangerous. I mean, if somebody's coming in with what looks like blanks and they're actually using real bullets, obviously that's, even if they haven't used it yet, I don't want somebody walking around with live ammunition in a parade. I'm sorry, I'm not going to wait till that person shoots somebody before I say there's a violation. And I think that's an instance where some of the protesters here are going overboard, saying we need to wait till there's a dead body before we can enforce the ordinance. No, we shouldn't. And when Mr. Jones asked a couple speakers about some reasonable restrictions, we got an answer basically saying no, nothing should be in there unless somebody actually goes and commits a violent act. And I think that's the whole problem we're trying to avoid. We don't want to have to wait until violent acts are committed. So I really hope that folks that share that concern about public safety and still want to protect free speech rights would work with us a little bit on coming up with some solutions rather than just saying no ordinance. And that's one example I can think of. I'm not sure on the flagpoles. We need to figure that one out. And it may be that the quarter-inch requirement, maybe it does need to be 3/8 inch. I don't know. But certainly people don't need to be having poles for their signs that are capable of serious injury. So there's got to be a reasonable compromise on that. The other thing we haven't talked about, and I'm wondering why not, is instead of looking at only the prescriptive, prohibitive acts or regulations, why we have not talked about bonding or cost recovery, insurance, indemnity provisions for people that put on protests. Because, obviously we're concerned about damage to personal as well as property damage. Now, if people are on the hook for damage done during a parade, maybe they do a better job of policing themselves. Was that looked at all or not? And are there cities that have that kind of a provision?
Well, I guess the initial ordinance addressed primarily the issue of unlawful objects. We do have on the books permit procedures. We do have on the books provisions for conditions. However, just as our processing ordinance provisions were antiquated, and that can be 5 years with the way the law goes, the same is true probably of conditioning authority. So we certainly could take a look at putting in more details. I can just tell you there are a lot.
Rich, are you saying then that under the current ordinance, it is possible we could impose those indemnity provisions or insurance provisions?
I think to the extent that's what we wish to do, we should detail them and put them in the ordinance. There's broad conditioning authority, and in the past that was sufficient to impose a lot of conditions, but there has been a fair amount of litigation over what are permissible conditions. And, for example, certain situations, particularly commercial events, you may well require a great deal of insurance that may or may not be, acceptable.
Well, it's interesting
First Amendment situation.
Because we require insurance of people just to put up a table. We've talked about this at festivals, and yet we're not doing that when there could be thousands of people involved in a protest. There ought to be some some sense of proportion there. I mean, when we're requiring insurance just for the Sierra Club to put a table up at a festival, and that people in the audience may not be aware of that, but that's the case because the city can't afford liability. In some cases, if it's a city-sponsored event, we'll go ahead and take on that liability. But for private events, the city's not taking on that liability and is requiring insurance. So it's interesting that we require that one, and yet not if somebody's going to have a much larger event with much more potential for serious harm. So I'm not speaking to folks in the audience at the moment.
The public testimony is concluded.
So all I'm saying, those are issues that need to be brought back at a subsequent hearing where we can consider some changes to what's before us. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question for Rich, or maybe it's for the chief. Are the proposed limitations here or restrictions here consistent with what the state of California requires on the state capitol grounds, on the west steps of the Capitol? And
they have different and sometimes more restrictive provisions, but not necessarily as many restrictions. For example, they have on their books in their Code of Regulations restrictions on the size of signs, which isn't something you see in our regulations. I think having restriction on the size, as opposed to perhaps the materials or materials used to hold your signs, is a big problem. I don't know if they enforce those. Those have been on the books for a long period of time.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Pinnell, you're next.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to ask a couple of questions. How much funds did we spend to get prepared for the folks, the violent folks that were coming to the city of Sacramento, basically almost destroyed Seattle? Do we know?
Get the speaker.
In the end, what was the amount?
You're taxing my memory here, but
I know we covered this under the USDA conference report back. Maybe Rich remembers.
Correct. We, Mayor and members of council, we did go over that in some detail, isolating all the different costs, and I'll have to go back.
You don't remember the total?
I'll have to go back to the report. It was a significant amount that had been budgeted by the city council.
I think it was several
and I believe it was about
$100,000.
$900,000 in preparation.
But compared to Seattle, wasn't Seattle like?
Seattle was. It's in your staff. It is in the staff report. It's I think $17 million in damage.
And the same people that basically tried to destroy Seattle, were they in Sacramento?
That's correct.
To where we needed to put an ordinance in place to protect the citizens, the nonviolent, professional protesters out there?
That's
would you
correct.
say? And I think that's.
I think there were some people. It was not the volume of people that they had in Seattle. Is my
not the
understanding.
volume, but some of the people.
Absolutely.
Who destroyed.
I think I can answer your question directly. Yeah. We had folks from the Seattle Police Department that were here with us during the event, and they were very helpful to us because they pointed out probably a dozen folks that were here that they were specifically aware of by name and had arrested them numerous times in Seattle. So they were at least a dozen people that I personally know that they knew of that had caused problems there.
And had we not geared up, would they probably have tried to do the same thing to Sacramento that they did to Seattle? Wasn't that the concern of all of us?
Absolutely.
Yes. Sure.
So
yes, that was my major concern.
I think we all need to remember that. And I think we do need a parade ordinance, but I'd hate to restrict all those parades that we have out there every year. I mean, Parkway has a parade. Parkway Little League have a parade. There's so many parades. I'd hate to have something in this ordinance that's going to restrict those people, those kids from having a parade. So I think we need to do a little bit more tweaking. But I think we also need to remember why this ordinance was put in place.
Mm-hmm.
So, thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. Mr. Trethewey, you're next. Sorry.
Thank you, Mayor. Really appreciate the, I guess this is a workshop tonight. I guess we're supposed to move on the ordinance, but I think we've all been part of working with the chief, and I think the compassion that he shared early on about the balance that has to be struck is what's on everybody's mind tonight. The speakers on both sides, I think the council too. That in that the obvious balance has been stated by just about everybody. The civil liberties must be protected, however you define your civil liberties. But in today's world, there's also we have to be watchful of the potential for violence. And it was the same way, I think, 30 years ago when I got out of Vietnam. I joined many demonstrations throughout Northern California. And the vast, vast majority really wanted to have a nonviolent, they wanted to have a public voice in very different issues. But in nearly every case, there was a small group there to incite violence and such. So that's the second dilemma that we're trying to deal with today. I think that's my own dilemma, is that the codification of conduct for parades or demonstrations. I appreciated Efren really spoke from the heart tonight, I believe, but when you are going to join a protest, which not everybody does, chooses to, but if you choose to, this country has an incredible right to do that. And if you got to, I find it difficult on the size of a sign or the size of a banner or the size of a plastic pipe. That the codification of that strikes me as we're way off base there. We're going into an area that cannot be resolved, and that's the third, I think, dilemma we're facing tonight. The parade participants or the demonstration participants, they need to know the guidelines and rules and expectations just as much as our police officers do. It's only fair, and I think it's confusing as we have codified it to date. I snuck into the Heart Center discussion, not seen by too many. I was there for most the entire time, and I think one person was very generous that it was a 2-hour discussion. You know, it really wasn't a 2-hour discussion. It was an opportunity for city staff to hear and to capture the issues and concerns of the people that were present. I think maybe the mayor spoke to for her felt expectation that there would be more common ground sought out in this revision and such. So I don't want to go into detail tonight. I think it's beyond us, quite frankly, that that we're able to articulate flags from banners, poles from weapons, and such. And so, I personally believe we should capture capture exactly what is the status of the ordinance today before we leave tonight. And we hear that we haven't enforced everything because it's been under review, and that doesn't sound fair to all parties and such. So I don't know how we do that tonight, but I think our staff and we do anything tonight. Thank you, Jimmy.
Well, I think we can clarify where the ordinance currently is, can't we? Is that a Rich question or is that a Chief question?
The ordinance is in effect and on the books as we sit here, and unless you amend it, it'll continue as is. You have a broad range of options to direct staff to come back with revisions, or adopt as is, or repeal and direct it to go to law and ledge. You have a broad range of discretion.
Okay.
Well, and Rich, in that, I think you said earlier that it would have to be applied on an equal basis to all parades or demonstrations?
Well, I guess what I'd say is we would not create exceptions for veterans affairs and other events. I think the chief will speak to the issue of they apply uniformly, but police always apply discretion.
Oh, absolutely.
And, you know, it's one thing to have a major problem and arresting people for speeding or whatever they're doing, and quite another, you know, to exercise some discretion and not go after someone who's going 26 miles an hour.
Right. Well, I'm still not clear on the viability of a Veterans Day parade with this ordinance, carrying weapons and or not. I mean, I know none of those weapons are loaded. I'm very aware of that, and also the size of the flag poles and such. And I think that cuts right to the heart of the existing problem. And then the other one I don't know how to get to is how do we rework this ordinance? So I too also believe that it's only fair to all parties that we have a parade ordinance. I had an idea on that, but I don't recall it. So anyway, those are my thoughts about all I can share right now. I don't have a lot more direction.
Okay. Thank you, Ray. Mr. Yee, you're next.
Well, thank you, Mayor.
Sure.
I think I have to agree with a lot of things Mr. Cohen had mentioned, so I won't have to repeat it, but I do think that there should be some kind of a parade ordinance. Maybe not in this current proposed form, because I've heard a lot of concern over how we define different things. So what I'd like to do is to continue trying to work with the current ordinance, and after hearing all of the comments that come in, perhaps tweak it to the point where we can try to satisfy most of them. If not, I'm sorry, I still want an ordinance. From what I saw at the last demonstration, there was enough things that was confiscated by the police department to make me concerned about what could happen. And I'm very glad that nothing did happen. Most of you out there are law-abiding citizens. In fact, I should say all of you are probably law-abiding citizens. The problem is when outsiders come in here and mix in with the group. That's when we have problems. The police can't go out there and say, hey, which one of you are the local group and law-abiding, and which one of you are not. I don't want to get to a point where the police have to answer that question. They're here to protect our property and our public safety. And I think they did a good job at that last conference. We had very minimum damage and no injuries. It's at least from what I hear. How we proceed, as far as coming up with a parade ordinance, I'm going to have to wait till we hear from the rest of the council. But I definitely would like to have some kind of ordinance. Maybe not quite as lengthy as it is. In fact, I was just discussing some of the items with Mr. Cohen on the different types of items that are restricted by the different cities. And I've heard already comments from the public saying, hey, there are already some laws on the books prohibiting certain activities. And so we don't have to repeat that again in a parade ordinance. So we can try to tweak it, but my position, we should have some kind of an ordinance just for our own public safety and protection of our property.
Thank you, Mr. Yee. One thing which I didn't make copies for the council members, but I went through the city's codes, and what we have in front of us is a portion of the parade ordinance, not the entire parade ordinance. Oh. And so the portions that define what a parade is and talk about the application process and action on application and denial, alternative times and sites, unlawful conduct, participation. The main part for us that we're dealing with today is 090, the parade and demonstration equipment prohibited section. So most of the parade ordinance remains intact. Unfortunately, we don't have the whole thing here in front of us, but the other portions of it are much more brief than this portion of it. So, anyway, thank you, Mr. Yee. Next speaker will be Mr. Waters.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not going to vote to rescind this ordinance. I agree with Mr. Cohn that some tweaking could be done. You raised the point about having an inspection of rifles and so on and so forth. What I heard tonight is rifles could be used as a club when they're brought into position, and so I think I agree with you as far as loaded bullets or even any projectiles being in there. But again, I think this is why we think we need a little tweaking on this ordinance, because it's not quite clear how we accomplish what we want to. I did hear some testimony tonight that at first I just kind of chuckled, and that's a styrofoam look-alike rifle that could be carried or allowed to be carried in parades, which that could not be a harmful club if they did use it on you. So that's something I think that staff should look into. And I certainly would disagree with the speaker that said that the police department wasn't trained adequately. I would disagree from my experience that they were well trained, and the restraint they showed, and there's some highlights on the video tonight, I think is very commendable. And to the other point about treating all parades the same, Mr. Archibald talked about the Ninth Circuit, and I think that that is something. We want to have the Veteran Day parades and all these other Little League parades and everything, but would they all have to be treated equally? So I think that portion of the refinement or the tweaking that I would like to see, those things are addressed so we don't get into this situation later. As was mentioned here tonight, the police, by state law, have the right to release or arrest or advise a person on a misdemeanor. Sometimes just a verbal warning works fine. So, however, the penal code says you must arrest on a felony. So this is where I am, that our police are well trained and they know the difference in a misdemeanor and a felony. And I want to close by saying, if you look at page 15 of the staff report, it certainly speaks to why the city manager and the chief of police and Assistant City Manager Ramirez gave this a lot of consideration. You just look at that, $3 million in property damage in Seattle, $17 million in lost revenue, $9.3 to the cost of the city of Seattle, $6.8 million the cost to the Seattle Police Department, and then the most defining one to me is 56 police officers reported minor injuries. They made 601 arrests. If I had that kind of intelligence presented to me and had a chance to confirm some of these things and who was coming via the different ways that were shown in the video, I think it's better to get ahead of the curve, as this department did, because I have a hard time comparing $900,000 versus 17 to 22 million that was spent in Seattle. Nobody was injured here. So that's kind of where I am and where I'll be coming down on voting not to rescind this, but to hopefully get answers to the few questions that I have tonight. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Robbie. And actually, you're making, I think, one of the points I started with earlier in the evening, which is the ability for us to review, and granted it's hard sometimes to tell years in advance exactly what convention or conference might bring with it. But I think that we do have to pay attention to that, because really prior to this big USDA conference, we've never had to deal with these kinds of things for quite a long time.
That's right. Back in the days we had the riots, which was not a demonstration, right. But that's Al and I were both in those, so we speak from experience there. But one point I did miss, though, Mr. Cohn was talking, Mr. Trethewey was talking about the size of the stick that you should use to hold up a sign. Maybe 1/4 is too restrictive. I don't know of any piece of wood that would have to be more than a quarter-inch thick to hold up a sign even 10 feet tall. That would certainly support a paper sign or any other cloth sign they had. So I do not believe that we should go any further than a quarter-inch as far as the thickness of these sign poles or sticks go. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Waters. Ms. Sheedy, you're next.
Well, it's been a long night, and I think that most of us don't want to rescind this, as I'm hearing, but we want to work it over again. When it was put into place, it was put into place on an emergency or on an emergency way. We went for the most extensive policy that we could find, and we looked at other cities and we took some of their uses that they had in their parade ordinances and put it together in ours. And I think we probably used more than we would have if we tended to not have the USDA coming. But when you are beginning to be a city, not beginning, we are a city, but when you're getting as busy and as big as we are getting right now, we need a parade ordinance. There's no question about that. How extensive we need it, though, I'm not sure. I agree with what's been said here. I think we need to look at it. I mean, like Ms. Pinnell said, if the Little Leaguers are having a parade, they can't carry their baseball bats, I mean, in this ordinance. But I also understand the discretion that the police officers have in what they look at. And I know that we had a successful conference here because of our police department and because of everybody working together. So I would not want to rescind the ordinance, but I would like to take another look at it to see if there's something we can do to make it not as restrictive as it is. I'd be willing to help on the committee if they wanted to put together an ad hoc or whatever to work on this with the police chief, or if you want to meet with each one of us individually, I'm sure that we'd all be able to make some time for that. But we do need an ordinance, but not as restrictive as this is. We need one that we can look at and explain to people what it is that we're asking them when they apply for the ordinance. I don't believe we can do that in this ordinance right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. Mr. Jones?
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks to everyone who came and testified tonight and wrote us letters and sent us emails and attended the community meetings as well. The sad fact is that there's always a few knuckleheads who ruin a good thing. And, the vast majority of the people that protest in the city of Sacramento do so in a very safe and peaceful and nonviolent way. But unfortunately, on occasion, there are a few knuckleheads here and in other cities in this country who don't follow that practice. And they then cause us to have to think about what we can do to make sure that those knuckleheads don't harm other individuals. And I think the police officer who spoke earlier tonight was very, very sincere about the fact that he and our chief take very seriously their oath to defend and uphold the Constitution and to protect people's rights to protest peacefully, but at the same time to protect people from violence. And it's how we strike that balance, I think, that's at the heart of this discussion. I think that what's in front of us is overbroad. I don't believe it's overbroad from a legal perspective because, as I think our counsel has indicated, other ordinances of this type have been adopted and withstood challenge. But I think it's overbroad as currently drafted from a policy perspective. And I think the testimony this evening really helped to articulate that problem. And I appreciate the response to the questions I asked and counsel's response to the questions I asked about the Veterans and Memorials Parade, because that I think helped to crystallize, I think, for a number of folks, some of the problems in trying to draft as broadly as this is drafted. So I think we should go back and take another look at this. I do think that there's some class of objects, and I know everyone's not going to agree on this, but some class of objects that most people would agree probably have no legitimate use in a parade. And I'd like to ask people to focus on that. And rather than having what I think so far has been a very polarizing discussion. Let's see if we can go about the task of identifying what those are. And I guess the other well, that's basically it. I think in a nutshell. And so my intent is to support the motion I think that's going to be made, hopefully to direct the staff to spend some more time working on this and see if we can't come up with something that strikes a better balance than has been struck here and then has been struck historically in the parade ordinance. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Ms. Hammond?
You know, I just have one question. Actually, I have two. But the folks that are asking that we rescind the ordinance, is that the only thing you want and nothing else will work? So because, and let me explain why, since I tend to be more direct. If we're never going to make you happy, then we might as well close public testimony tonight and come back with some changes to the ordinance, because if I'm the last one or second to the last one to speak on this, what I've heard is we all think that we need to have an ordinance, but that it needs to be changed. And so I suggest that when you look at the existing language, that you concentrate on Section 2 of 12.40.090 and 7. And I think we have suggested a deletion of the spontaneous use of a city park. And I say that both to those folks that want this rescinded as well as to our city staff, because we're not going to rescind it. So if you're never going to be happy with anything on the books, well, then we might as well just go on and do what we need to do. I would hope that we can meet somewhere in the middle and continue to have dialogue on what's less restrictive but will still provide protection both for protesters as well as innocent bystanders. Quite frankly, I hope to join you in a protest sometime soon. And no, I don't want you to respond. I want you to think about this. And, well, as your council member, Heidi, if you want to call me and we can have a conversation, but you have not called me. You asked. I'm not having a discussion with you. You can call me and have a adult conversation. Okay. It's late.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hammond.
Well, if I say any more, it won't be appreciated by Heidi for sure.
Okay. Well, I think that Mr. Waters is next. So, Robbie, do you want to?
I just asked the city attorney for clarification, what direction it looks like we're going and what we've given staff as direction. Could we close the hearing tonight, or must we open it again and basically hear the same complaints?
Well, actually, there is no requirement for a public hearing. This is a piece of legislation amending your city code. So the Brown Act dictates how much testimony you wish to take and whether you wish to, hear further testimony when the amended ordinance comes back. I think if there are major changes, you may well wish to, hear from folks. You have several options. One is to bring it right back here. One thing you may wish to consider is amendments and take it to law and ledge. But if you don't want to do that, we'd be glad to work with staff and make the amendments and bring them back here.
Well, my suggestion would be that we bring it back to the full council. I don't think it saves. I think all it does is give everyone a second meeting, as opposed to just bring it directly back to us. And so, pardon? Fourth, fifth, sixth. I don't know how many times. I mean, we've been through this several times.
You're saying, excuse me, Mayor, you're saying not to go to law and ledge, just come
my
back
suggestion is that we ask staff to rework it. I think, and bring it back to the full council.
I agree.
I think that our decision tonight, however, is that, and we're not really, we have to decide if we want to put this portion of the ordinance on hold, which is section 12.48.090. And I do think that it would be appropriate to allow the city manager to have a designee to respond to the permit requests, and that is section 12.48.030. And so there's that one change, which I don't think anybody here has a concern about. I think everyone has stated we need to have a permit process. We have one in place. I think being able to allow the city manager to have a designee is appropriate. I know there are some concerns about the spontaneous portion of it, but I think the most troubling portion of it for most people has been this parade and demonstration equipment. And so it seems to me that it might be appropriate to just put that section on hold until it's revised, or we could leave it in place until we have changes. Those are really the choices before us tonight, I think. Yeah. Mr. Jones.
I just have a question for council. While it would be unlawful for us to selectively enforce the existing ordinance, the chief does have discretion with regard to uniform enforcement of the ordinance. And so, given the conversation that's occurred amongst the ultimate decision makers, is it not the case that the chief could exercise his discretion with regard to this ordinance going forward until we make our final decision in a way that, as long as it's not being done selectively, in a way that would not necessarily result in precluding people from engaging in some of the behavior under the ordinance?
There's
I guess what I'd say is the chief.
you turned your mic off.
Chief and his officers always have discretion when enforcement of ordinances. I guess I'd leave it at that.
Okay. So, I mean, to me, you know, we haven't, frankly, we haven't arrested anyone for a violation of the ordinance since the conference, right? Okay. So, you know, we may, rather than figuring out what portions now at 11:05 to pull out or not pull out, we may be better served just by saying to staff, go back, redraft expeditiously, bring back, and again, my preference would be to not close the public hearing, but allow the public to be heard when we bring it back, because I think there'll be my hope will be that there'll be significant revisions. That'd be my personal viewpoint, Mayor.
Yeah, well, it's not an official public hearing, so whether we allow public testimony or how much we choose to hear next time, we'll decide when we know what it is we're discussing. Mr. Cohn, back to you.
Yeah, Mayor, I agree with the last comment by Mr. Jones. I think our best approach is to direct staff to come back with revisions based on the concerns that have been expressed by council here, and I understand that some of those concerns are conflicting, so you're going to have a difficult task in trying to do that, but I think it'd be best to go ahead and do it. Some of them you heard more or less of a consensus. I'm sure you can watch the tape of this and decide that, but I think it'd be best just to bring it back. We know there are issues that need to be resolved based on what we've heard. Keep the existing ordinance in place to be exercised judiciously only as needed. So with that, what I'd like to do is go ahead and move that we continue this hearing to an unspecified date to give staff time to come back with amendments as appropriate to respond to council comments at this meeting tonight.
Okay. I have a motion and a second to ask staff to really rework the ordinance based on...
Let me amend that.
Yeah.
I said unspecified, but it probably would be better to do it before our two council members that are going to leave. So before the end of their term, so that we don't have to have two new council members have to come up to speed.
Well, and it would be nice for everyone to get this resolved and clarified, I think, as soon as possible. Chief, how much time do you think that you will need working with Mr. Little? And I'm not sure who else, or Rich, I'm not sure who's the right person to ask how much time you need. Is 2 weeks enough? Is 4 weeks enough?
30 days should be more than enough to go
I
through
would think so. Okay, so within 30 days, 4 weeks.
All right.
Okay, Mr. Tethaway?
Thank you, Mayor. One thing I'm supportive of this. I would like to see us be able to, when we set how soon we're going to come back, that we can release it to the public in draft form maybe 10 days in advance or 2 weeks instead of the Friday before the Tuesday meeting.
Okay.
Looks like that's good.
Anything else? That was,
was
that a
Mayor,
motion to continue, basically, or to direct staff to rework it and bring it back to us within a month?
Yeah, the only caveat on a month, I think with Ray raises a good point. That's why I'm thinking we might want to say 45 days rather than 30, just to be sure we take into account sufficient time to do that extra week notice, which we did this time. And I think even though people disagree with the content, at least people had the ability to read what was being proposed prior to coming to the hearing. So I think that's important.
Right.
Thank you.
This may be a question for the clerk or maybe for Rich. Since this is an ordinance, do we have to pass this for publication a week prior to when we vote on it?
My recommendation is that would be appropriate to do. It provides the notice.
So then when we do the pass for publication, it should include the ordinance this time?
We will include the ordinance, yes.
Okay.
The whole ordinance.
The whole ordinance.
Yeah, it needs to have the definition of a parade, et cetera. And
well,
not
if
just
that's what you mean, then I would suggest, to staff attached to your next report, they're not all that long, the current provisions, both the parade regulations, and there is a provision that deals with use of parks.
Right. Okay. Does everyone understand the motion? And okay, all those in favor, please say aye. 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 Any opposed or abstentions? Okay. That concludes that item then for this evening, but certainly not for all times.